to this comprehensive session on jQuery. So in this session, we'll cover the following topics that you can see on the screen. So we'll start this session by understanding the introduction to jQuery, and then we'll understand the DOM manipulation and jQuery effect. Once you understand these concepts, we'll go through the jQuery forms and events, and finally end this session with jQuery, AJAX and utilities. So today we have a special guest Varun who's going to take this session forward. So over to you, Varun.
Hello everyone, welcome to Edureka's on jQuery UI development. I will be your instructor for this course. My name is Varun, and before we begin, I would like to share a short introduction about myself. I have been doing development for about 6 years now, and I have done development in several languages. These include Python, JavaScript, PHP, Ruby, Java, Android, and for the past 2 years or so, I've also been working on Angular 1.x. JavaScript continues to be one of my favorite go-to languages for its ease of use. And jQuery is something that I used extensively in the past, and I believe that it's a very, very, very important stepping stone when you're learning about front-end development. It is one of the key stepping stones that you need to, I think every developer needs to know a little bit of at least before they go on to things like AngularJS or React.js and Vue.js. So that's about me. Right. So just a quick refresher on what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is for. So HTML is basically the structure of your website in terms of the architecture. Okay, this in the sense that, okay, I want a box here, I want a round shape here, and this is the layout, right? CSS adds any sort of styling to that structure, whether it's from color or shadowing or font size or font weight, multiple things. JavaScript, however, brings your website to life, right? So of course, you can make a pretty HTML and CSS web page, but then if it doesn't do anything, and by doing I mean when you click on a button or when you hover over something or something else, it doesn't really do anything. It kind of becomes boring after a while, right? I mean, on Facebook, how interesting would Facebook be if you could not really like anything? You could just read information. JavaScript adds interactivity to your web pages. How you might have experienced that a little bit already by if you have done JavaScript, but otherwise you're going to see now how it does that and what are the ways in terms of how you can add interactivity to your web page. And as the image goes, right, HTML is for structure, CSS is for presentation, and JavaScript is for behavior. So let's look at the basic DOM structure. So basic DOM structure, this is just a simple HTML document here, and they have laid it out in a tree sort of pattern. Okay, there is the document, it's the parent of everything else, the document tag. Within the document tag, then you have HTML tag, which further contains head and body, and then head contains title, and title contains some text over here. If you look at this, right, and then you have h1 tag, which contains some text, and then you have the p tag, which contains some text. The DOM really refers to, so whenever you're writing HTML, what is really happening is that you're writing certain directions to a browser. So a browser is a software, right? Through writing HTML, you're writing certain directions to the browser that, hey, paint my web page in a certain way. So it's like if you had a friend and he had a canvas, that canvas and that friend together are the browser. And you, as a developer, are the person who's instructing this browser or person. And you're telling this person, hey, draw a box for me. Make it this wide, make it like this, make it have this shadow effect, print or display a message like box 1 over it, the font size, the font weight, multiple things, right? Or if it's a document, like let's suppose you're dictating a document to somebody, okay, the heading should be jQuery training. Start with the subheading jQuery intro, then start with the paragraph, plan your jQuery training now. So that is sort of the way that the browsers work. This HTML is essentially directions. They are essentially directions to the browser. Okay, what the browser does is that it takes those directions and creates something called as a DOM, a document object model, out of it. Now, why does it create a DOM? Because it needs to apply the styles that you have provided from the CSS. It needs to do several things to it. So it converts it into something called as a DOM and makes it available to you and to itself for manipulation. And a large part of JavaScript or jQuery has to deal with DOM manipulation. And we're going to figure that out as we go along. Right. So When it comes to DOM manipulation, right? If you look at this example, some of you might be familiar with this, right? So let's talk about this particular line. Let's suppose that there is a div tag with the ID results. This particular line basically gets that element, gets that DOM element to you in this variable, in this JavaScript variable. And the following lines are setting the HTML inside it. So basically you are setting HTML or you're setting text inside an HTML using JavaScript. Now that's a very, very powerful concept, right? Right there. That you can deliver a web page to a user with a certain look and feel, and then based on how the user decides to interact with it, you will make changes to that web page. You can literally change this entire web page right there and then, because you have JavaScript helping you out, because it has access. It can read that HTML document, that DOM. It can read the DOM and pick out the nodes in the DOM. So think of these as nodes, and think of jQuery having access to each of these nodes and having the ability to modify each of these nodes, whether it is the content of the node or it is something else that it can do to a node. Now, one thing about the DOM is that every browser behaves a little differently. So, if you have ever felt that your website doesn't look the same on Chrome versus Mozilla versus Internet Explorer versus Opera or versus Safari, and I'm sure you must have experienced this with even very, very good websites, like they tend to differ quite a bit depending on how careful the developers were. So the reason is that it's not broken, it's just that every browser behaves differently. So it's like this. Consider each of the browser as a person, right? This is friend A, this is friend B, this is friend C. You are giving directions to paint the DOM. So you want something called as a document to be painted or printed on a canvas, and you're giving instructions to each browser. But each browser behaves differently. Each, like a person, the browser behaves differently to instructions. Now 90 to 95% of the behavior is similar, but that 10%, 15%, depending on what kind of instructions you're giving, might change. So the websites don't look massively different, but they're still a little different, right? So that comes from who developed that browser, what did they want to build it for, what is the main purpose. So Internet Explorer, for example, is built primarily for security. It is supposed to be very secure. uh, Chrome is built for something else, Firefox is built for speed, Safari is built for something else, Opera is built for something else. And based on those decisions, sometimes these behaviors change, where they might not react to a CSS property, or they might not perceive a certain way in a certain way, in a certain directive in a certain way. So this is a problem. This is a huge problem for developers who have to build quickly, and they have to build websites which would sort of at least 90 to 99% of the time behave in a similar way across browsers. Because if you were to build for different browsers, or if you were to write separate code, say doing the same thing for different browsers, it would be just too much work. And developers are supposed to be lazy, right? So jQuery helps us out. jQuery really helps us out. So think of jQuery like a manager, okay? Think of jQuery like a manager who knows each of the workers. So if these are my friends, he knows the behavior of each and every friend. He knows Firefox requires more directions than Chrome, or Chrome is a bit slower than Internet Explorer, or Internet Explorer needs to be given the instructions slowly. Now, these are not the actual differences, but I'm just giving you an example. Now, as a manager, jQuery knows how to deal with the different behavior of different browsers. So it eliminates the need for us to write code specific to browsers. Instead, it takes care of it for us. That is the first and the most fundamental reason why jQuery is so popular. That it removes the dependency to write code for each and every individual browser. Makes it very easy for people like you and me to build websites really quickly. Okay? So what is jQuery then? So jQuery is essentially a JavaScript library. So it is still JavaScript. Please don't be confused about this. I see people early on being a little confused in terms of what is the difference between JavaScript and jQuery. JavaScript is a language. jQuery is a library built using JavaScript. So jQuery fundamentally is nothing but a lot of JavaScript code that has been written by developers who are way experienced, who have 20 to 25 years of experience developing and programming and so on and so forth. So jQuery is just a library. Now, it was first released in 2006. It's one of the most popular libraries with cross-browser support. It is lightweight being that the size isn't too much. It improves developer efficiency, of course. Easy to learn because it relies on a lot of CSS based syntax. We'll come across this soon. So let's move ahead. Now, the next question is why jQuery? I've already answered this a little bit, but let me still go through it. So jQuery is a JavaScript library designed to simplify the client-side scripting naturally because of the syntax being similar to CSS, cross-browser support. It helps in creating dynamic web pages. Now, dynamic in terms of whenever you are able to manipulate the DOM, that is what adds a dynamic nature to your web page and your web application. So that is one of the fundamentals again, that it creates dynamic web pages which respond to user input. It is intuitive and easy to learn. We'll figure that as we go along. It integrates with IDEs, so IDEs have out of the box support for it. It helps in pages loading faster. So because the size is small, the download time of the library in itself is small, which helps out. So generally when you find websites to be slow, either it's your internet connection, and if that's not the case, then the website is heavy. Heavy being that the size of the code that you're downloading to run the website is a lot. Next is that it helps in creating animated pages like Flash. So before JavaScript or jQuery or even jQuery became really popular, one of the typical ways to animate a web page was using Flash. However, that meant that as a front-end developer, you had to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Flash. Further, Flash is not, I think it would be sort of sufficient to say that it's not the most elegant of things to deal with when it comes to browsers. Again, a lot of problems across browsers and across OS as well. So, what happens is that jQuery, because it's so easy to use and there are so many functions already built in, it provides us with a lot of functionality to create animation, which is similar to Flash but without using Flash. So in terms of you learning newer things, it reduces the number of newer things that you have to learn. You don't have to learn Flash, and you're still able to create beautiful animations using jQuery, which is also a part of a dynamic web page, right? A web page which can sort of animate based on user input or based on certain sections being loaded and so on. So HTML document type, it informs the browser what document type it is. And again, it has to do with the interpretation of the document. So again, the HTML document just contains directions to paint a web page. And the doc type basically tells the browser which version of directions these are. And so it is very important. Till HTML4, this was the way that you would mention the HTML document type, and from HTML5 it's just very simple. You just type this and that's it. This would be sufficient. Now CSS selectors. So I'm pretty sure that you guys must have come across this by now. There are various ways. So whenever you give directions in terms of, hey, I want the box to be of red color, or I want the font to be 14 pixel, or I want to divide up the page in columns of 20%, 20%, and 40%, right? You write that code as CSS, but then how do you tell CSS, how do you link the HTML and CSS together in terms of what style is to be applied on what element? That happens through selectors. Now there are multiple ways to select or identify a tag. So imagine it in this way, that there are 8 boxes that you're telling your friend to that you told your friend to paint on the canvas. Now you want one of the boxes to be of red color. Naturally the friend will ask, hey, which box? Now if the boxes were numbered, that they were identified as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you would tell your friend, hey, box number 3 needs to be of red color. Now when you're doing this, this is an identifier, and selector is, I think, a synonym. You can consider it as a synonym for an identifier. So there are various ways to identify a HTML tag. One of them is the tag name in itself, that is a p tag or a div tag or a span tag, and these are then universally applied. So if I apply a span tag with font size of 14 pixel, that will be applied across anywhere in my HTML document that I use a span tag. Then there are ID selectors, which you set by setting the ID on the HTML document. Then you can of course set the class selector as well. Now tag, ID and class tend to be the most popular ones, but then there are more. There are a lot of ways in which you can set selectors. There are pseudo class selectors, there are selectors based on relationships, that is the parent-child relationship. Then there are attribute-based selectors, and then there are multiple selectors as well. So for now, I think we can focus on the top three, that is tag, ID, and class. But I think even selectors based on relationships tend to be commonly used as compared to the other ones. Right. So the jQuery object, if you have studied JavaScript, you must have studied the object. So just a quick refresher in case somebody has forgotten. Let's say I open my local host. Okay. So this is an empty web page right now, but just to quickly show you what I mean is that this is an object in JavaScript, right? Curly braces open and curly braces closed. And it essentially contains key value pairs. So if I had to count the number of fruits, I could store it like this. And then if I do a.apple, it would print 1, a.banana, it would print 2, and a.guava will print 3. So similarly, what you have is something called as a jQuery object. Now, there are two ways to use the jQuery object. One is the dollar symbol, and the other one is jQuery written in this particular casing, that is J small and Q capital, and the rest of them small again. You can use either. It is fine if you use dollar or if you use jQuery, but a lot of times the examples that you will find on the internet will be using dollar. So I think for this course, we will stick to dollar. Now, dollar is essentially a function, okay? You need to really look at it like JavaScript syntax. So it's dollar is nothing but for you a variable. So if I was to show it to you again, you can consider it like this, where dollar is equal to this, right? Now I can say dollar dot a equal to 3, and if I print dollar, then it's an object. So dollar is a valid identifier or a variable name in JavaScript in general. But what jQuery does is that it adopted the dollar as a symbol for itself. That all jQuery needs to be accessed through the dollar. And if you look at it, it's not just a variable. Actually, it's a function. jQuery, this parenthesis, right? If so, in JavaScript, functions are called by the parenthesis, the opening and the closing of the brackets, and then code inside it. So this is essentially the jQuery function, which has a lot of things inside it, a lot of things as we will discover. But you really need to visualize it in that particular way, that I'm just calling a function. That's it. Okay. So a jQuery object is like an array which contains 0 or more indexes. It also contains object methods like length, context, and selector. So I think as we go along, we will figure out how all of this is true. So it's a jQuery object contains a lot of things, right? And I will just show it to you in a few moments what all it contains. But keep in mind that it is nothing but JavaScript at the end of the day. So we are not going to lose sight of the fundamentals. Very, very important. Okay, so some IDs for jQuery. So I'm going to be using Atom. There is Sublime Text, again, one of the very good ones, lightweight. There is Dreamweaver. You can also use it in the browser console, like I was just demonstrating. There are online editors such as JS Fiddle, JS Bin, Cloud9, and then there are debuggers. So I just use the Chrome Web Inspector. In Mozilla or Firefox, there is the Firebug, and you can use either depending on what you're familiar with, what you have installed. All of them are good, right? So jQuery, CDN, and installation. So there are two ways of installing jQuery in the web project. One is to download jQuery and have the file like just like a JavaScript file stored on your laptop or in your project, and give the path to it. So that is what I have done. I have the jQuery.js file here. If you can see, this is a lot of scary JavaScript. Don't be confused by it. No, you don't have to read through all of this. But I just included it like this. So I just added it. It's over here. It will find it and I'll be able to use it. Okay. And the other way is through the CDN, which is called as a content delivery network. So just a small note, I'll not go into the depth of CDN, but CDN are basically hosted by big companies such as Cloudflare, such as Google, such as Amazon. jQuery in itself might have its own CDN, which are basically localized servers. So servers which are close to your specific location respond to your request. The benefit of a CDN is that, of course, because the server is physically close to you, physically meaning that it's not sitting in the US. If you're in India, it's sitting in Singapore. Or if you're in US, it's not serving you a file from India or UK or Europe. It is serving you a file from US itself. So physical proximity plays a role, of course, in transfer rate, as well as the fact that the file version is being maintained and you don't have to maintain a copy of the file on your own machine. That also plays a role. Then there are certain other benefits in it being a standard file, so on and so forth, versus you choosing it from something that a co-developer downloaded, so you are sure that it is the original jQuery and it's not been modified, it's not been messed around with. So because if you think about this, right, there's this file, I might accidentally edit it, I just edited it, now something might break if I'm one of the developers on this project. But if you're downloading it from the CD, and I can't really accidentally change something. So that is why the CDN helps out. But if you're developing on local, I usually prefer local being, if you're just in development mode, I usually prefer having the files on my machine because that's much faster, because it's just serving the files from my machine to my machine. And I don't have to wait for it to download from a server. So development, I would suggest that go with downloading the file. Okay, so before we start with this, let me show you something. Now notice that I've already loaded the JavaScript file, the jQuery file, sorry, and I'm doing a console.log of dollar. I have not defined dollar anywhere, unlike the browser. Okay, and I'm going to reload this page. I'm going to reload this page on my browser. I'm going to just get rid of this. And if you notice, it has jQuery HTML line 36, and has done a console.log. It has returned a function. So jQuery dollar is a function essentially, which can be a little head spinning, but in JavaScript, even functions are objects. Okay, even functions are objects. So when it said that dollar is an object, it is correct, and when it says dollar is a function, is correct, because functions are also objects in JavaScript. Now, if I do jQuery, I'll get the result as the same function. And for comparison's sake, let me do it like this. So if you notice, both of these are returning the same thing, right? They're the same function. Let me just remove these for a second. Yeah, let's also try something else. Let's see if they are same. And they are. So as I said, jQuery or dollar, it is the same thing. Okay. So now talking about what we are doing here, let me just, okay. So I have a simple HTML file which has a div tag. Now notice that there is nothing inside this div tag. So even when I'm loading this page, right, there is nothing to be displayed. It's an empty HTML page with nothing inside it. Everything is basically I've commented out everything. There is only one div tag, but it has nothing inside it. Now let's suppose I wanted to display something after the page was just loaded. How does that work? So let's break it apart piece by piece. So I have dollar. It takes something called as a document. So when I pass in document over here, jQuery understands that I'm referring to the entire HTML document, right from the very top. And then I'm going to use something called as ready. Ready is a function. Again, it's a function. So this is a function, the one that I've highlighted, which has another function on top of it. JavaScript allows us to do this, okay? That there are functions defined on top of each other. It is also called as chaining. That I have a function topped on another function. So I'm calling a function which takes in a parameter. The parameter is another function. So I know that we're doing a lot of functions here, but just bear with me for a second. So I'm basically telling the browser that, hey, when the document is ready, execute this function, the one that I've just selected. Just run whatever is inside of it. So I'm not setting a timer here because I don't know when the page would be loaded or when the page would be ready, right? I'm just saying that, hey, whenever the document is ready, do whatever is inside this function. So let's try it out. Let's do a simple console.log. Document is ready. Let me actually also comment out all of this. Now let me reload the page. So this prints, and let's see if we had this outside. Let's set it on the line number, on line number 36, and then on line number 42. So if you see, right, line number 36 is executed, line number 42 is executed. But the document got ready later on. It executed this, it set this instruction, it moved on to this instruction, and when everything was done, and when the page was ready, so the document was not ready until and unless it comes down to this one. Unless it goes through everything, the document is not considered to be ready by the browser. So this function does not get triggered. But then internally JavaScript triggers this function once everything is ready. So this is really the first snippet of code I think that most people go through when they're writing jQuery, that when the document is ready, do something. And the next thing is that we want to display something on the web page. Now jQuery allows us to select an object or select a element in the DOM, or to break it down, it allows us to select a particular HTML tag. Now selection can happen through multiple ways. It can happen by saying div. So it will select all the divs available in the document, all the divs. Even if there are like 1,000, 10,000 divs, it will select all the divs. Not recommended that you do this because naturally it causes a lot of problems. So like CSS, if you wanted to set the style on all divs, that is what you would do. Then the next option is to select it by ID. So if you look at this over here, the ID is ready demo. So I can just set the hashtag like I would do in CSS. So CSS would be something like this, right? Or let's reduce it a little bit, right? So hashtag ready demo. In a similar way, I can do hashtag ready demo over here, which tells jQuery that, or the browser in fact, that this is what we are referring to. This is what we want something to be done on. What do we want some to be done on? We want to set the text inside it because it's empty, and we want the text to be document is ready. So we were doing a console.log, but now we want to show the user that, hey, my web page is ready. So we want to say web page is ready. Now let's reload the page. As you can see, it appeared. It wasn't there. It is my code which put it there. So anything I print over here, it will show over here. And this happens after $document.ready. So when the document got ready, then this function was executed, and the function execution wanted this to happen. First, select the tag that you want to make changes to. So I want this node to be modified, manipulated. I want the text inside it to be web page is ready. And that's what I ended up doing. Going back to the slides. So it is executed as soon as the document is ready for DOM manipulation, and we assign a function, right? So moving on. Now another thing that jQuery allows us to do, which I was talking about, is chaining, or even actually JavaScript allows us to do is chaining functions on each other, where functions are executed one after the other. Now I know that we haven't that these are not familiar to you, so I'll go through them one by one. So let's suppose I wanted to set the color of this after it loaded. jQuery provides me with a method called as .css, and whenever you're kind of searching for these things online, you have to refer to them as .css in jQuery, and you will immediately open the documentation on Google or jQuery website. So cs.css in jQuery, this is a method which takes two parameters. The first parameter has to be the CSS property and the second parameter has to be the value. Okay, so let's run this for a second and see the result, if it works or not. Okay, it already did, right? Web page is ready. We can also chain another one to this, or let's suppose let's try a different one. Let's try it as something like font weight, and let's set it to 700. Now it becomes bold. If I make it as 100, it is not bold. If I make it as 1000, it is okay, it is not bold. Yeah, 1000 is not a valid property. Yeah, 700 is. So it becomes bold. And I can even change the color again. So I can make it blue now. So I'll go over here, I'll select the color. So if you look at it, it's a sequence. First do this, set the text, then color, then this. So again, I'm giving directions like to a friend. But this time the canvas is ready and probably it's a second friend, which is my JavaScript and jQuery friend, which I'm telling that, hey, now do this, now do this, now do this. And to try the last thing that was given on the slide deck, which is fade in, which basically tells it to fade in sort of an animation. We're going to talk about it more later, but let's look at, okay, this is not slow enough. Let's look at how to make it slower. So this is the jQuery documentation. I'm just going to try and figure out how to make it slower. Okay, so it takes a number. I can give it a number. I can say, I think it's in milliseconds. So I can say that, hey, show it in 2000 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds. Okay, let me set it to 5000, which should be 5 seconds, which is pretty slow. Okay, right. I think my live reload is enabled and that's why it's kind of not loading really, it's not really showing that effect. Let me try it out like this. Okay, yeah, right. Moving on. Okay, so jQuery also allows us to declare functions of our own on the dollar object. Now, this again goes back to the fact that functions are also objects, and objects can contain functions on top of them, right? So an object in JavaScript can uh, have like one of the keys, one of the keys be corresponding to the value, which is a function. So to define a custom function on JavaScript, this is sort of the way we would do it, where we would call $.fn.myCustomFunction and then define a function which would do something. And then we can do further things to it. So if you have to define your own jQuery functions, there is a possibility to do that as well without, rewriting the entire library. However, what I would suggest is that just keep it as a mental note for now, because it is preferred that you are a more advanced user of sorts who has done this, who has sort of familiarity with JavaScript, with jQuery and JavaScript quite a bit, to be attempting this. But it's a good to know thing that you can extend the library. And one of the most beautiful things about jQuery, you can extend the library through your own means and fashion. Okay, coming to querying the DOM or selecting various parts of the DOM object using jQuery and JavaScript. Okay, so I have an example for you. It is nothing but a simple list. Okay, and what is happening in this list is that there are three items. Wait, let me actually just show you the HTML. Right, so this is a list. There are three items in the list. There is outside. It's an A tag, not referring to anything, but probably we can just refer it to Google. Then there's the div tag inside it, which has another A tag inside it. It's for demonstration purpose, not necessarily that we will build something like this, but it would help me demonstrate a certain amount of concepts. And then it has other elements inside it. Okay. Now, okay, so as I just showed you that we queried the DOM using the ID selector, but we can also use other CSS selectors as well. But let's stick to the ID selector for now. Now, over here, the example that we have is that if there is an ID called as fruits and we had to take the text out of it, it would return the entire li, all of this inside of it. If we then go to again, this is a separate way of referring to it. This is another way, and this is another way. Neither one of these is right or wrong. Use the one which you're most comfortable with. So I think a lot of you might be comfortable with the first option. This one is a more generic one, and this one would only select the li inside it. Okay. So as I have told you that jQuery relies on CSS selectors, it uses the same power of them. Now there is the ID selector. It looks for a unique ID and selects it and sets the text inside it. We've already done this demonstration, right? Moving on to the next one. Then there is of course the class selector as well. So if I were to, let's suppose, go to this document and change the class to ready one and change this to ready one as well and change this to ready one and then go and then reload the page, it still works because now it's a class. So instead of the hash, it's a dot. Now the question might be when to use which. Really depends on you and really depends on your on, let's suppose if you are making the project, but I would typically say stick to one. But in case you don't want to define extra ID, so let's suppose you have a div tag, right? And you defined a class on it. Now you don't want to add extra HTML to it by adding an ID tag and referring it to as something else in JavaScript and forgetting the reference again and again. So it might be convenient to use classes wherever they are applicable, and in case a certain element of your HTML does not have classes, then you could probably define a div on it. Oh, sorry, you can probably define a ID on it and use those. And then there is naturally the element selector. So let's suppose I will add a heading over here and I'll say heading h1, close it, and once the page is loaded, we're gonna say dollar h1 dot css color, we're gonna say red, and we're going to then go ahead and reload the web page, right? So if you saw for a brief second it is black, but then it quickly transitions to red. So even by using the h1 tag, that is pretty much like how it would work in your CSS. You can set it up, or you can change the text entirely. And we can do this. We come to this, and we change the h1 tags. We change the h1 text. Okay, moving on. Then, of course, there are the attribute selectors, which is by saying that, let's suppose there is an A tag and it has the target set as self, or it has a href which is set to google.com, and I want to select it and I want to modify the color of it. So the way this would work is that, let me just add an A tag over here, and the target is, so it has an attribute set on it, and then there is another one. Okay, so what jQuery allows me to do is go over here, say select an A tag which has target equal to self, and you change the CSS color from blue that it would typically be to green. Okay, I forgot the quotes. The quotes need to come here, and I'll change this to double quotes. Okay, let's try it out. So if you notice, the color has changed. Let me mute all of these out so that you can see clearly. The color has changed. If I were to change it from self to blank, the other one, the Google blank one, gets colored. Let's see if I change this to yahoo.com. Okay, let's suppose you made a mistake. Both of them say Google inside it, like to the user, but actually one is for Yahoo. So what we want to do now is we want to select the one which says yahoo.com, and we want to change the text to say Yahoo, right? So if you notice, Earlier in the HTML, this is being set as Google self, but then we changed it. We selected on the basis of the attribute, and then we changed the text inside it. Okay. So this is how you will basically select based on the attribute. So attribute refers to, so I know ID and class are also attributes, so it might be a little confusing in terms of course, I think when you've read it, when you've read CSS, it would refer to class and ID as attributes as well, and it is, they are attributes, rightly so. But then what we are referring to here is kind of attributes which are not ID or class, which are not ID or class. Okay, next is universal selectors, which is basically a star symbol, which will select everything in your document. Not recommended that you do this. It will eat up a lot of memory, probably crash your website on the user's browser. So yeah, but the star symbol will essentially select everything. Okay, next is position selectors and pseudo class selectors. Right. So let's try this out actually on this particular one. Now, if I had to select the LI, let's suppose I had to select the item list, item minus list, and then I had to select the LI and I had to do the CSS color as red. Let's see what the result is. Okay, this did not work. Wait, maybe this will work. Okay, so what happened is that this is the way that you can select the children inside a parent. So what I said is that, hey, select the item list, the element with item list, and then go to the first one inside it. Go to the first one inside it and set all li as with the CSS as red of color. Now, what if I had to do this only on the first one? So if I had to do it only on the first one, this is how I would do it. Notice how the difference is. Only the first one is colored red. So I'll just remove this because it might be confusing some of you. Yeah, it's just CSS precedence which is playing here. So let's suppose first one is coffee. So first one is set as coffee. If I had to select the second one, I would go as second. Okay, I think I made a mistake. Let's look at, yeah, let's try with two. Yeah, so I think this works only with first and not with second. But if you have to just select the first one, I think it also works with the last. Yeah, it works with the last one as well. But okay, right. So it works with first and last, but not with second, third, or fourth. So it's more about first and last are easier. But I think then if you think about it logically, the number of items in a list can be 100 as well. So it would not be possible to kind of name the middle ones, the second, third, because different people will refer to them in different ways, and that would be unmaintainable. So you can select the first or the last of a thing as well using first or last. Now, and then of course the pseudo classes. So the other option here was that if I suppose knew that everything else had to be turned away, I could do it like this. So I set the not, and then yeah. So here is what I did. I said a which does not have href as google.com. Set that text to Yahoo, which does not. So not is also available as an option. So next is traversing the DOM. So traversing is basically walking through the DOM. It's like walking the path, walking element by element by element by element. And with query selectors, which is the first part, you can make the first selection. But then if you want to keep going down a particular nested set of tags in your HTML, that is where traversing the DOM will help you out. And then there are some common functions available to us. Find finds all matching elements. Children is same as find but moves only one level down. Closest moves up the DOM tree. So it doesn't move down, it doesn't move inside, moves up the DOM tree until it finds the matching parent. Parent moves up the DOM tree but up to a single level. So closest will find the closest match even if it's way up. Parent will just move to the next immediate single level. Okay, it will find the parent of this particular node. Next moves down and targets the immediate following sibling. Now what is important to notice here is the sibling part. It will notice, it will go to the sibling. It will not go to the child. So if there is a li tag, right? So li tag, if you call it on an li tag, it will move to the next li tag. It will not go to anything inside it, any HTML inside it. Previous is just like next, but moves up. So it moves to the preceding sibling, and siblings it targets move up and down. So if I select it on an li tag, it will select all the other siblings. First gets the first element from the selected set, and last gets the last. So I think that kind of shows where I went wrong earlier. So first and last, basically first goes on the first one and the last only on the last one, not on the middle ones. But if you have to traverse the middle ones, then probably something like next or previous or closest, that's something that will come to help. So let's see a couple of examples of each one of them. Okay, so let's mute this out and mute this out as well. Okay, so what I've done is that I've added a simple button here and I've added a click function on it. Now what I've done here is that whenever I click on this button, which is present on the web page here, something will happen. Now what that something will be is being defined by me here. So what this is going to do is going to go to item list, this UL that we have created, it's going to find the A tag, and it's going to make all CSS, it's going to make them of red color. So let's try this out, right? Let me click on the button. So all the A tags went red. Coffee was not an A tag. In fact, let me, so that we can remember, and we can say this is yahoo.com, and we can say this is, and if I click me, see how it found only the A tags and not coffee and not milk and not tea, and it set them to red. So essentially item list, find A, set the color to red. Next one is the children example. So if I was to do this, let me try and do this. Or let me first show you this example. So we did find, right? We did it on item list, but let's do it on the first li instead, which will select this particular li tag. And let's see what the result is. Pretty much like the same one. I selected the li, the list item first instead this time, and I set the color to red. Now what if I change it to be children? What will happen? Only google.com, only google.com gets colored red. Why is this? Because children goes to the next immediate one, which is this one. It will not go inside. It will not go more than one level deep. If this was outside the div tag here, so this div tag contains this, right? If this was outside, it would have worked, but then it is not. So this doesn't work out. So children goes to the next immediate one. Let's go to the closest one. Let's see what the outcome is. Try to guess before I demonstrate. So closest goes to the immediate closest one. Let's look at the definition once. Moves up the DOM tree until it finds the matching element in DOM. So it moves up the DOM tree actually. Okay, so nothing is happening. The reason is that it is moving up, it is not moving down. It is not moving down. So we need to find something up here. So if we add an A tag over here, which is outside of UL, so it's no longer about being inside UL. Outside UL, A tag Okay, wait. Yeah, so I think it would be better if we, so inside what closest does is that it tries to look for the closest parent of a particular type. So what I've done instead is that I've selected this particular A tag, which is inside li, and I've said, hey, find the closest li and set the color to red. So this is what this is going to do. It's going to go to the closest li and it's going to set the color to red. The page is reloaded. Let's click on this button, and if you noticed, the li this time, the li gets turned color to red. So there has to be a relationship. What I was trying out earlier was that there was no relationship between the li tag and the a tag outside it. But now we know that it has to be a parent-child relationship where it tries to find the closest parent up the chain. Now going to the parent example, we are again going to select the insider div a tag, and we're going to find the parent and we're going to give it a border of 1 pixel. So let's try it out. Okay, so the div tag containing yahoo.com gets a border of 1 pixel over here. Okay, next is next. So we're going to go to the first li, we're going to go to next, and we are going to give it a css border of 1 pixel. First li, and it gives it to milk because it is going to move to a sibling, not a child, not a parent, but to a sibling. So at the same hierarchical level as itself. Let's go to the previous one. Okay, so in fact, let me make it a little simpler. So it will go to the last li and then it will go to the previous sibling. So it will go to t, and but from t it will go to milk. So this till this it is at t, then it goes to milk, and then it sets the CSS. Next is siblings. So first li, then the siblings, and sets them with the border. Okay. We could also do it like this, where we select this and right, instead of last we can do first, and then it will set it to both of these, or last will do it to both the above ones. Okay, next is first. So let's see what this does for us. We'll select li and we'll select the first one. So we select li and we select the very first li that we find, and this one will select the last one. Of course, there was another way to do it. So there are multiple ways to do the same thing. My recommendation would be to select the one that you're most comfortable with, that you remember at the top of your mind, and just use it. There's really like little right or wrong here, for especially for beginners, and eventually you will get into the mood of using these variables, or using these functions in a way which makes sense, which is sort of convenient for you at the given moment. So they come in handy when you are dealing with a lot of complicated DOM manipulations. For beginning purposes, keep your focus on the first part, that is just selecting an element using the class identifier or the ID identifier or the tag identifier. So one of the most important aspects of jQuery is DOM manipulation. Doing DOM manipulation can be cumbersome based on different browsers. Each browser will react in a different way to your instructions if you're writing plain JavaScript. However, jQuery comes to the rescue with a bunch of methods which are around DOM and which handle that difference from browser to browser for us. Now, as in anything related to programming or computer science, there are four things that you can do to any particular object, and those are creating it, reading it, updating it, and deleting it. So adding or removing is creating or deleting, modifying is updating, copying or cloning is reading and then writing. So these are essentially the four fundamentals on which a lot of things are built on. So by manipulation, we simply mean that any changes, whether it's updation, creation, or deletion, or simply even reading it, those are any sort of DOM manipulations that are available to us. Now, there are certain simple methods to manipulate the content inside a DOM element. So one is the DOM element in itself, manipulating the DOM element in itself, and then even the content inside it. So in last class, for example, we saw that there was an empty div tag, but we placed some text inside it after the page had loaded, right? That is an example of content manipulation. So sometimes you see it on website, right? When you click on a button, something reveals itself. Some answer to a, let's suppose a question shows up if you have taken one of the quizzes here, or something else happens. So that's an interaction where you're clicking on something and the response is that the text appears or the content manipulates. There are primarily three values. There are three ways. One is the text method to update the text inside our HTML. There is a HTML method to insert or update the HTML code inside an element. So, and then there is the value method, the val, which can get values from an input box or set values inside an input box. Now, the difference between text and HTML is natural, that text is simple text, plain text, but with HTML, you can actually place HTML inside your document. So let's quickly jump into an example. So what I've done here is that I've written some simple HTML. It's inside a container tag, right? There is a question, there is a answer box. The result is empty, right? Because the user hasn't answered a question till now. And then there is an answer over here. So we will show the result of what the user submitted as well as the correct answer. So, and over here, what I have done is that once the document is ready, I've set something called as a click listener. So we covered this in the last class as well, that this is sort of an event listener. So this is going to come in depth later, but for now what you can understand is that whenever the button is clicked, I want it to do certain things. So the first thing that it will do is that it will get the value from the answer box. And let me just open it up here so that we can compare side by side. So this line over here, answer box, it refers to this one, right? ID. We selected it dot val. It gives us the answer. Then we check if the answer is Delhi because we know the question is India, right? Of course, this is just for example's sake. In real world, like the way once you're building it, then probably you're going to add some other operations to it. And if the answer is correct, in the result one, we want to display that your answer is correct. If the answer is not correct, we want to display some HTML instead with the span style of with color red saying that your answer is incorrect, and we want to display the correct answer as well using text. So we have ended up using val, text and HTML all three in this example. So let's quickly run it in the browser and see how it works. So let me give the answer is Calcutta and submit it. Okay, seems like I made a syntax error. Let me just quickly fix it. It says it is over here. Okay, yeah, this should fix it. Let's suppose I type in Calcutta. So as we wanted it to do in case of a incorrect answer, your answer is incorrect, right? It's displayed over here, and the answer tag, the answer is displayed. Let's look at the HTML if it produced right. So this did not have content inside it before we started, but now it does. Now it does have content inside it. And let's try for the correct one. If I answer as Delhi, your answer is correct. If I reload and I type in Delhi, it will say your answer is correct. It is added to this. You can in fact see the DOM manipulation happening in front of your eyes by like. So if you notice here, the result is empty. Let me type it in and just keep observing this part. Did you see it? Did you see the change? This was not present. Let me do it again. This is empty right now. There's nothing inside it. I type in Delhi, I submit, and then suddenly there is a small animation that you can see. It blinked for a second. That is done by the Chrome DevTools. That is not essentially related to JavaScript as such, but it's just an effect that you can see, sort of see that the DOM was manipulated. You can see it taking effect in front of your eyes. Let me in fact show you the incorrect one as well. Keep observing the section here. So if you saw, both of them got affected now. Let's see it again. You see both of them got affected. Result as well as answer. So yeah, I mean, it just talks about the same thing that we can set the text, HTML or value. Now, the other thing is that we can also add or remove DOM elements, which is also very, very powerful, that you can add to your HTML after the HTML has been served. So till now, what we were doing was that we made an HTML document and it was fixed, right? Like you could not add more p tags to it, more div tags to it. But let's think about something like the Facebook feed for a second. It's an infinite feed or any of the social network feed. As you keep on scrolling down, it just never ends. It's infinite. So what is happening over there? Essentially, Facebook is adding more and more div tags or stories, as they call it, or posts. But that is essentially HTML code and it keeps on adding, 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 and adding. It's an infinite list. It keeps creating. So it does that through JavaScript, where JavaScript creates the DOM and it just keeps on adding to the feed infinitely. And then there are a couple of methods available for doing this. So after, before, append, prepend, and remove. All of them work in different ways. So let's dive into some code and see each of them in action. So I'm going to just comment this out because we don't need it anymore. Okay, I think I might be having some. So let's remove this as well. And okay, let me take this and place it over here. Okay, so what I've done is that I have created 4 boxes on my web page. I'll just show them to you in a second. So here are 4 boxes: after, before, append, and prepend. I'm going to show examples of each of the function using each of these boxes. So they are present over here, and the styling has been done somewhere over here. Yeah. So there is a color box. It has a width, it has a height, it has a border, margin, and then there is an after tag on it, which gives it the color. So the color is given to it by us. Now each of the boxes has a click event on it. So once I click on it, it will append something to itself, which is going to be again a div tag, which is going to be another box. So clicking on one of the boxes will add another box to it. For the purpose of demonstration, let me even remove the other boxes so that we can only concentrate on one box at a time. So I'll even comment this out, only one box. And the box that I'm going to attach, it is going to have the class as attached and the color is going to be yellow. Okay, so if you saw, this particular thing got attached to it. If I click again, another one happens. Now why they're appearing vertically like this, that's more of a matter of CSS. But if you look at the DOM, let's concentrate on the DOM. We had this div tag, right? So what after does is that it attaches it within that particular div tag. So after will, boxes will come after this text. So it is not outside of the div tag. That's a different one. It is inside the div tag in itself that we selected. So dot after dot append, and it will keep on adding, keep on adding, keep on adding, keep on adding. Okay, let me show it to you again. Observe the DOM. So let's look at it. The div tag, the HTML that I wanted to add, was added after this. In fact, I can show you another example. So let's actually do it like this. Okay, yeah. With UL again, it will add to itself. Right, 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 right. So it is not outside, it is inside. Very, very important to remember that. Okay, let's remove this and then let's go to before. What happens with before? So in before again, we're just going to call this method dot before as we just saw on the slide, and let's see what happens. Okay, so now it gets appended before this. It gets appended before. Let's see what is happening over here. Now before is outside the box. It is no longer inside. It's not attaching to this text. So this can be very confusing for a beginner. It adds an element after the specified element, right? But after does it on within the tag that you've selected. Before does it outside the tag. Let's go to the next one, which is append. So append will again append it. So after and append are pretty much similar here, that they're appending within the color box. They're appending within the original div tag. So if you read the definition, it adds an element as last child to the specified element. So it keeps adding as children, one after the other. Let's talk about prepend, and let's unmute this. So prepend will attach before the element. So it will add parents to this particular element. I hope it is clear. So please notice whether it is inside that particular tag that you're appending to, that you're calling append on, or it is outside. That's the primary difference between after, before, append, and prepend. So another very useful jQuery method that is available to us to manipulate properties and attributes on our HTML DOM is the attribute attr method. It allows us to either get the values or set the values on our a tags or image tags or anything that for that matter, any kind of tag. But one sort of usefulness would be sort of, let's suppose we have a list of links and we want to, based on some condition, replace them with something else, or we want to change it to something else. So let's start with an example. So let's suppose you have an href tag Google, okay, and the target here is blank. Target here is, and this is yahoo.com, Yahoo, and let's suppose there is a button over here. ID is something. It is, let's call it link fix. So we can remove all of this code, or let's just keep it over there, and we can just simply write fresh over here, and it will be something like stack link fix dot click function, and we will say, hey, find all the attributes, find all the a tags, and set the target to blank. So let's see what happens. So if you notice, yahoo.com, the target is not blank, it is self. If we click on this, yahoo.com changes right there in front of your eyes. The target attribute changes. If this was self and even this was self, then doing this would change both of them. Another thing that we can do is we can just get the values first for target. Let's just first console.log these values and see what we get. Go to console. Right, we got the first match. In fact, let's make it as blank. Let's see what happens if we have two different sorts of values. If we click on fix my links, and again we get self. So I think it would pick on the first one then. So in case you have multiple matches, it would pick on the first one. So let's set a condition saying that if target value equal to self, take the a tag and set the attribute to blank. So you can see that it set the attribute to blank. Now interestingly, it set it to the last one. It did not set it for Google. So only for the last one will it Okay, wait. Right. So sorry. So it will set for both of them. And if this was blank, so then this does not work because if there are multiple matches, so it will stop at the first one. It will stop at the first one. And because it will not find it to be blank, or we can do something else. We can say, because we have learned the HTML tag, we can say $a dot HTML. We can see, or we can do this. We can do a console.log out of this and see which one it did actually select. So we have clicked on this. Let's do this. Okay, so this one essentially gives us for both of them. Let's try this instead. Let's see what this results in. Right? So it returns just the first one. So because this condition is not setting true, even though there is a document with self, so it's very important to remember this when dealing with ATTR, that if you're searching for something using it, it will only go to the first one. But if you're setting something using it, it will set all of the elements which match. So if I just did it outside, then even this one would be fixed. Otherwise, it will go individually to each and every A when you're getting the value. Now, there are various methods which are available on top of this. One of them is remove attribute. So it removes an attribute from the selected element. It Then there is has class, which checks if a certain element has a certain class or not. There is add class, there is remove class, there is toggle class. So toggle class is basically, it will check if the class is present. If it is not, it will add. If it is present, it will remove. Then there is the prop as well, which is kind of introduced in jQuery 1.6, and attribute, the ATTR method is internally calls prop, and it gets the value of a property for the first element in a set of matched elements. So this is what we were observing, that it was getting the first element in a set of matched elements, or set one or more properties for every matched element. So this is where the behavior is coming from, because ATTR is internally calling prop. So and it says very explicitly over here, it gets the value of a property for the first element, only the first element in a set of matched elements, or sets one or more properties for every matched element. So that is significantly different. Now let's quickly run a couple of examples for this one. Let's see what remove attribute and each one of these method does for a quick demonstration purpose. Okay, let's suppose for removing attribute. Okay, let's suppose it had an ID, and for some reason we wanted to remove the ID attribute. So we can do it in this way. We can say remove ATTR, and we can give it ID, and let's see if it removes it or not. So it is currently saying ID. Click on fix my links. The ID element is removed. If we told it to remove href, hrefs are removed. See, now the links don't have any hrefs. We can tell it to remove target as well, and they will be removed too. Next is has class. So you need to pass it the name of a class. So let's suppose we call it color box, we call it after, and we say dot has class after equal to true. Then we want to do something which is available as add class. So then let's add a class, or rather let's remove class. I'll do remove class after add class golden link. So let's make a class called as golden link. Just a simple demonstration. We're going to call it, we're going to give it the color of gold by removing the already present one. So we're going to check if it has the class after. If it sets out to be true, then we're going to remove the class after and we're going to add the class code link. Let's try it out. So as you can see, there is a slight difference already in the way Google is being represented over here. The CSS has changed. Now let's click on fix my links. If you observe, that goes away and the golden link class has been applied. I made a mistake in the style one. Yeah, I made a spelling mistake. Let's try it out now. Now observe that it has been given to both of them, not just one, because I'm using a general one, right? I'm adding class and everything. So it might be a good idea to not do this, but instead say select, do it like this, and then go for the class after dot remove class after dot add class golden link. So this way we are trying to add it only to the Google A tag and not the Yahoo A tag. So you see, only add it to the golden A tag because we selected a particular one. So we said $dot after, remove the class, and then add another class to it, and that gets modified. Okay, the next one we can do is $A toggle class after. So now we are saying that the elements which have after class, remove it, the ones that do not, add it. So you see how it switched from one to the other. We can also add another one. We can add another one called as golden link. Both of them become golden, and we can add another one saying toggle class color box. So this is based on chaining. I'm chaining multiple effects together. So now it's a complete switch from Google to Yahoo. Let me actually zoom in. So if you notice, the DOM is changing accordingly every time. I can do this a number of times. This will keep happening. Let's go back to the slides. Right, so as you can see in the example that I've just shown, this follows a slightly different example. Perhaps you can try it out at your end and see the results, or you can try out the example that I gave you. Now, another one is to clone, and again, very useful. You can sort of clone an element and you can insert it after or before, or basically do something with it. You want to clone, let's suppose, one particular link, or you want to clone an HTML tag. So this is what helps you out with. So let's change this to clone my links, and let's remove this. Let's remove this as well. And what we will do is we'll say a dot clone. Oh wait, it's going to be insert after. So we can just insert it after the A tag itself. So let's see how this works. So why did that happen? Because it selected all the A tags, not just the first one. So it's selecting all the A tags and cloning all of them. So instead I could, let's suppose, create an ID saying original or master, and we can say hashtag master dot clone, insert after, let's suppose ID is clones, and I could do this, insert after hashtag clones. Now it gets inserted after hashtag clones. Let's see if it append or after works on this. Okay, after doesn't seem to work. Let's see if append works on it. Oh right, so insert after, that wouldn't work. So it keeps on adding. And then there is another one. Let's suppose you have some sort of event set on it and any sort of data set on it. Then you need to set clone, you need to pass it a boolean of true. By default it's false, to copy the events as well. So in case it's a button that you're copying, or it's one of those boxes that we just made and you're trying to copy that box and you want even the subsequent boxes to respond to it, then you would need to set clone as true so that even those boxes would have the event. So let's try it out with this. I just noticed that this needs to be after, not append. And I think now it should append after the box, not inside it. So we will try to see that we clone this and we're going to insert after this one. We are going to insert after, let's do it after our color box. Let's insert it after the color box. Now if I click on this box, nothing happens. If I click on this, another set of boxes come up. Let me reload. Let me zoom out. Okay, one box, multiple boxes. But if I click on any of the duplicate boxes, nothing happens. Click on this box, nothing happens. So then I need to set this as true. Now what will happen is, two boxes, if I click on this, either one of them, it will replicate. It will replicate. Even this box, it replicates. So that's just to add the event handler. Let me show you this one again. Sorry, wait. This is after. Now these are coming after it, right? These are coming outside. Moving on to the next one. So there are two approaches to move an element around the DOM. One is placing the matched element relative to another element, and the other one is placing an element relative to the matched elements. So one, basically what it does is that it takes the matched element and places it relative to another element. Or you take an element or you place an element which is relative to the matched element, and that is where append and append to come into the picture. So there is a slight difference between the two. Now jQuery provides us with something very useful which is called as a $.each. It's a replacement for the traditional for in or for loop in JavaScript and helps us out quite a bit actually. So let's do a quick demonstration of this over here. And the way this would work is that I would define an array of let's suppose num list is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I'm going to say $.each. I'm going to pass it the num list function, and it's going to be the index and the value, and we can simply just do a console.log index and value. Let's see what the result is. Let's look at the console. 0 is 1, 1 is 2, 2 is 3, 3 is 4, 4 and 5, 5 and 6. So it allows you to iterate without using those initializations of I is equal to 0, increment, decrement operator. You can just loop over using a for each. It gives you the index and the value that you're looping over. It can be pretty useful, especially if you're doing any sort of functional programming. And naturally, it will also allow you to loop over a set of link elements, any sort of list elements. So that would be something very typically useful in the context of DOM or document object manipulation. If you want to, let's suppose, loop over an entire list of LIs, then this is going to be super useful. So let's try this out quickly. So I have a list over here. Let me take it out, place it over here. Let me mute this and let me mute this as well. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to select all the LIs and I'm going to call .each on them, and I'm going to, so it's going to give me an index and an element. I'm going to check if element dot, I'm going to first just do this. Let's just see what is inside each of our elements and then take further action. Okay, let's see what element we are getting first and then take further action. Right, so we're getting li tags, each one of them. Let's see if we can apply any of the jQuery functions on them. So you need to keep trying out things, okay? And I mean, that's very, very sort of important. There will be failures, there will be chances that certain things are not working, but don't be discouraged by that. I mean, if you think about it, it's quickly, right? You try a couple of times. one thing doesn't work, but something else does, and that gives you a better understanding of what you're dealing with. So let's look at what type of thing it is that you're getting over here. So it's an object. So, and of type li, and now we can do various things to it. So another way to deal with this is with this variable in JavaScript. Let's try it out. Let's see what we get over here. Now we get Google, Yahoo, and Amazon. We can also check for has class, golden link, doesn't. So let's do it for each of the elements. Let's do a toggle class. So each of the elements get a toggle class. Let's look at what happened. This is the UL we are dealing with. Each of the li get a golden link toggle class. Of course, the A tag in itself has a blue color, so that overrides it in case somebody is confused that this is still looking as blue and not yellow. It's just that this overrides the outside one. So we iterated over each of the loops, and essentially we ended up toggling the classes to a golden link. Another one is EQ, which selects from the set of matched elements at a specific time. So let's suppose we only wanted to add it to the second one and not the first one. So the way we would do this is that, forget this for a second, this is just basically looping over the entire thing. Instead, what we could do is that we could add some code like this, and we could say equals to dot toggle class golden link. So 2 gets selected, 2 being it being 0 index naturally. Now 1, and this one will select 0. If we set it at an index which is not available, it just does nothing. So it allows us to select a particular one from a list of elements that we might match. So it is actually acting as a filter, right? It is filtering out the other elements that we do not want to touch or we do not want to manipulate. Now there is another function available which is called filter in itself, and you can pass it a selector. So .eq basically takes the specified index. So you need to consider the fact that this is sort of like an array. This is sort of like an array that is returned over here. And we are saying that we want just the second element of the array or the first for a particular one. But let's suppose our matching criteria is a little different than this. Something around the fact that I want to select an li which has the class. I'm going to filter out all the li's which have a class of middle. So let's suppose, and let's suppose we actually add some styling for the middle one. Let's suppose we add it color as light blue, and once we get to it, we want to do a toggle class of the golden link. Okay, let's run this quickly. Okay, seems like we ran into some trouble. Right, I missed the dot over here because I want to, right. So you see this middle two get selected. So EQ just allows us to select one, but if you wanted to select multiple within a set, so if you had 4 and you need to select 2, then you will go for something like filter where all the elements which specify a certain criteria. With EQ, you are fixed to one element because it can only take one index at a time, naturally. And you need to know which index as well. Over here, you are sort of with filter, you're setting a condition that, hey, give me all the elements which have the middle class set on them, which might be multiple elements, as in this case. Then there is something called as has, which checks for certain things and accordingly sets the CSS, or you can do further operations on it. So in this case, it will check for descendants, and if it finds a matched element based on the descendant, then it will do certain thing. So let's suppose over here the example is that if my li in turn has another set of ul tags, then I probably want to set a css on it. Okay, I want to probably set a css on it. So let's actually try out this example in itself. I'll remove this, and let's suppose the last one is not this. Instead, it is something like another UL inside it, and it says something like, so a lot of times websites have different web addresses based on the country that they're serving. So Amazon France, Amazon.in, and let's suppose there is another one called Amazon.us. Now what we want to do is that we want to check if it has a UL. Okay, this li has a UL. Then I want to set an attribute of background color as light gray, let's suppose, or let's just make it style. I want to set a style. We will set the background color as light gray. Let's run this. Okay, seems like we ran into some trouble. Let me try it with CSS. So we set it up, but right, this one works. So maybe the background color property doesn't work on UL tags. So this works, and we have set the background border as this. And now, yeah, let's try over here if background color. Yeah, I think I made a spelling mistake somewhere. Let me try it out again. Let's try the same color as light blue. Yeah, so this works. Now please notice that it's not applying on the UL, but it is applying at the LI level. It is not applying on the child, it is applying on the parent in itself. But we are filtering it out. We're filtering it out on the basis of which particular element do we want to attack. Now, what not does is that it removes from the set of matched elements. So quite simple. Let's suppose I want to do this for everything which is not in the middle. So not is like the opposite of has. That's it. And as I go over here, the first and the third one are selected. The others are ignored. Fair enough. So jQuery also has support for data APIs, which has been introduced in HTML5, which lets you set data attributes or get data attributes from the HTML that you might have set up. So let's have a look at an example. I'll just explain it to you in a bit. So let me comment this out. Now I have two buttons here. One will attach data to a dev element and the other one will remove it. And these click events are set on the same. Instead of test object, we can do it something like this. Data, let's suppose it is cart 200 and we want to get the data of cart. This out. Let's see what we get. So we have the dev element over here. No, wait, we're talking about this particular dev element. Let's add something to it. Let's add an ID tag, data example, and let's use it like that because then it will not confuse with the other one. So we need to set the data on this particular div tag, right? We will simply pass it an object like this, and then on clicking the button 2, we will get the data associated with it. So let's do this. Let's remove these errors. Assuming this has worked, once we click on this, it should display a value of 200 in the console, and so it does. So this is how you can use data attribute, and you can use it on to set any number of things over here. In fact, so let's suppose I set items, then I do this, and then I can also do it for items. And once I reload, I can attach it to them, Move this, and then it shows both of them. So 200 for cart and 300 for items. Coming back, so jQuery also provides us with a bunch of effects such as show, hide, and they are used for showing or hiding the DOM elements. So of course you can remove elements, you can add elements, you can also show and hide them. This is something which is very commonly used, and it takes two parameters. These are essentially functions and they take two parameters. One is of speed, in terms of how slowly or fast or immediately or you want to display or not display them. Then it takes a function as well. So in case, let's suppose after showing or hiding you wanted to do something else based on the element being shown or hidden, so the callback function is provided where you can execute any code that needs to be executed after the element is shown or hidden. So let's do an example. For this, what I'll do is that I'll set up my HTML on the boxes that we had. So let's do it on the boxes, and I'll show all the boxes. Keep it over here. Let me give it a class of container, and let me give it a display of inline block, and let me give the container, let me leave it empty for now. We'll see if we need to fill it up. Let's see how our page looks right now. So our page looks like this. Let's remove the button tags that we were using for the data example. So now we just have this, and let's add a button, the ID of show boxes, and let's add another button which says hide the boxes. Let's give some space within them. Let's see how, let's sort of give a line break over here as well. Okay, so now we have two buttons over here. Let's come to our JavaScript. Let's take this and move it somewhere here, comment it out. Let's comment this out as well. Let's come back here. Let's write fresh JavaScript for these boxes. Again, click events, show boxes dot click function is ready. Okay, now what we want to do is, before that, let's define it for hide boxes as well. Say is that anything with a color box class, hide it. And over here similarly we'll say anything with a color box class, show it. Over here, seems like it is not working. Let's try to figure out why is that happening. I have missed the ID tag. So very important, sort of a silly mistake. In case your code is not working, immediately look at whether you have missed the tags or not. Let's try it out again. The boxes are hidden, the boxes are shown. The boxes are hidden, the boxes are shown. Now this is a sudden knee-jerk sort of reaction where it is just immediately coming in and going out. Instead, it would be better if we could add some sort of slowness to this motion where it would gradually happen. So let's add 500 milliseconds to each one of them. We hide our boxes. Now look at the difference. Suddenly it seems more user-friendly, right? It goes in and out slowly, and let's make it 2000. And then with a certain pace, it just eases into that motion. It's very soothing, it's very nice. The user doesn't get the knee-jerk reaction as before, that it was just like appearing and disappearing. Next is, of course, now the other thing is that we can sort of combine these two buttons together and say that toggle boxes, or let's suppose, let's not do that. Let's instead comment it out, create another button which says, let's call it toggle boxes. Let's add another event. So now what we're trying to do is that instead of defining two boxes, two different buttons, we are going to do a toggle. Toggle essentially in jQuery is basically either one of the two. So if they're hidden, it will show them. If they're shown, it would hide them. So let's do a toggle. Let's take it for a spin. Right? So single button. Let's look at what is happening at the DOM level. They are not being deleted from the DOM. They are still present. The display is none. Once again, so just that a display none property is being added to them. That's all there is. And we are doing this through JavaScript by calling the toggle function. Then there are other functions such as fade in, fade out, fade to, slide down, slide up, slide toggle, which sort of have a different sort of animation effect, each one of them. So let's quickly try out these ones as well. Let's see what is the impact. So I'll mute this out. Instead I will. So now instead of showing and hiding, we are going to do a fade out and we are going to do a fade in on of the color boxes. So now the intention is to make the boxes fade in or out. See, there's a fading effect. This is different from what we were doing earlier. If you noticed the motion of hiding them, it was very different. If I do that again, see, it goes towards the left top. It fades out, but it starts from this area and it goes towards this. That is very different from this one. Now, these are subtle differences, of course, but that's what front end is quite a bit about. Notice the small differences, and it can make a huge impact on the user interface and the user experience for their website. Then there is fade to as well, and fade to, instead of fading in and out where it changes the opacity on the object gradually, it will change it to a particular opacity. So what we mean by that is that it will still be present, but the opacity would be reduced. So let's try this out. So if you notice, they are present, but the opacity is 0.5 now. So it would be 1 in normal circumstances. I can do the same for show boxes now as well. Or let's try what happens when I do this. So this doesn't exactly do anything because they're already in present over there. Instead, if I want to do the opposite, I would have to do this. So let me fade them out. And now let me fade them in. Fade out, fade in. So if you notice, this is more of a disabled kind of state that you might see on websites for buttons or for areas or sections, whether they're enabled or whether they're disabled. Okay, then there is also something called a slide down, slide up, and slide toggle. So let me mute these out. So let's do a slide down, or let's do a slide up, and let's do a slide up in 500 seconds. And similarly over here, let's do a slide down. So you saw how they slided up. It's a different kind of animation effect. And now they slid out, slide up, slide out. It's like a drawer, slide up, slide out. And slide toggle basically does either one of them depending on the current state. Pretty much like how we were using toggle over there in a similar way. Not too much of a difference. Finally, jQuery also has a dot animate function. Now, see, hide, show, fade in, fade out, slide up, slide down. These are sort of animations that are provided to you right out of the box. But let's suppose you wanted to do something drastically different. You wanted a certain animation effect where you wanted the box size of the box to grow from a certain size to a certain size in a certain amount of time. So you wanted this. So currently the animation boxes, each of these boxes are 250 pixels, but you wanted them to grow to size to, let's suppose, 270 pixels in 20 milliseconds to kind of create an effect. So .animate is going to help you out with that. The way it works is that it takes the properties that you want to change. The first is the properties that you want to change, and then the time, then a callback function like you've seen before. Not necessary that you implement the callback function, it's there just in case there is some action to be taken. So let's try and add some animations. Let's see how this works. Let's call it animate boxes, animate, and button. And then let's add the if. Let's add it. Animate boxes dot animate and let's do it in 1000 milliseconds. And okay, we need to attach a click event. This can't be it. That's just the button, right? So we need to call it on color box dot animate. Let's do a simple one first. Let's suppose we wanted to increase the pixel width, and that's it, and we want it to happen very slowly. We want it to happen in 2000 milliseconds. Let's see how this works out for us. Let's take it for a spin. Looks like I made an error in my syntax on this particular line. Okay, I did not declare it as a function. My bad, I'm sorry. Let's try this out. Nope, error again. Yeah, I think I need to keep this between the quotes. So you notice how this very slowly, it happened very slowly. Let's try this again. Instead, this time let's do it to 300 pixel, same time. And let's suppose we wanted it to move from the top by about 40 pixels at the same time. So, and we want the position to be set as absolute. That doesn't seem to be working out. Let's try with margin top instead. Maybe that will work. Maybe it's causing a CSS conflict, and yeah. Okay, I think I need to kind of set it like that. So now it moves down. Now it moves down, and let's suppose at the same time I wanted to on the opacity to change to 0.8 as it is doing this action, or let's suppose make it a little more dramatic. So the properties are being set from here, like what do you want the CSS to be applied. So you really try to understand what animation is in a way. Over here, animation is nothing but changing the positioning or the styling of a particular HTML tag in a certain amount of time. That's it. So that's what it does. So this is the target. This is the final result. These are final CSS properties that you will end up setting on it. And you want it to be done in a certain amount of time, which also determines the speed of the animation. Now, instead of display inline block, I've changed it to display block. Doesn't change much though. Or let's try with inline. Let's see if that causes a significant difference to the way they are aligned. Okay, not really. So that is what animation really comes down to. If you want it to happen really quickly, you change the time and then it will just happen. So depends on what you want to achieve, who you want to achieve it for. That's what dot animate does. And you can of course chain multiple animations on top of each other. So this is one animate, then there can be another, then there can be another, or you can combine them together. It's the same thing. I mean, it depends on really what you're trying to achieve with it. So form validation got a bit easier with HTML5. In case you haven't checked out these features, I strongly suggest that you go out and check out the form validations available with HTML5. In some cases, however, the HTML5 validation fails. So what you can do essentially is that you can set the attributes on the HTML tags to do the validations. But sometimes the validation fails, or maybe you need very custom, or there's a scenario where you can't use them. And that's where jQuery or JavaScript steps in, that it allows you to do the validations using your own custom rules and regulations and needs. So talk about the jQuery validation. First and foremost, you need to get the value from the form, or you need to set the value in a form. And there are various ways to do it based on the kind of field that you're dealing with. So what I have here is that I have set up a demo which contains various fields, and we will try and do getting and setting of the variable values using each of these fields and see how it goes. So if I do inspect and I talk about the name column, right? To get jQuery, let me just clear this up. To get the input variable name, I can simply do this, and it shows no value, right? Of course, because I have not put anything in here. So let me type in Edureka and then see, wow, so we got Edureka. Let's set the value as Edureka Inc. So did you notice that the value in the name box changed? Let's try again. So did you notice? So just by using this, I can set or I can get the values inside a field. So let's suppose I change this to mango, just a random word, and I do text.val. See, I can get the value in JavaScript. Next is the password field. So as you might know that HTML is a special field for password so that the password stays hidden. So let's see how we can get or set the values of the password field. So a field over here, let's look at the HTML. The HTML sets the type as password. Let's suppose I'm going to set a password as 123456, not a very safe password, but fine for demonstration purpose. And if I had to get the value, this is how I could get it. I hope that's clear enough. It's pretty much like the text field, just that you need to select it using input password. Unless and until you're using some other form of selector, which might be ID or class. But if you're selecting by the type of input it is, then there is little difference between text box and password getting and setting of values. Same is the case as text area. So you just need to get the value using input colon text area, and you can set it just by passing the value. Next, let's cover the radio buttons. These are quite interesting. So I have two radio buttons here. So to see if it is checked or not, I have to use the is keyword. Right? It's not checked. So let me check the first. Now it becomes true. I can also do this. I can set the attribute. So it's checked right now. Please notice the radio button, this one over here. I'm going to set it to false. So this does not work. Now there is a reason here. The reason is that I did not select which one to set. There are two radio buttons here. So let me try and set the first one. So a minor difference, instead of attr, what you need to use here is, let me just clear it out first. Instead, what you need to use is the dot property, and you can use that to set it to false, or you can use that to set it to true. And what nth is basically, because input radio matches multiple elements, right? Because these are two radio buttons. You can use nth 0, 1 like an array. So you're accessing the 0 or the first element of this array. So now I've set the first one or the second radio button is true as well. Now I've set it as false. And I can do the same one to the 0th one. Moving to the next one, checkboxes. So for checkboxes again, we can get the value of the checkbox using the input checkbox property. Additionally, if we want to select a particular checkbox, we can pass in the name is equal to checkbox name as well and select the same. So let's try this out. So I have a couple of checkboxes here. Let's look at the HTML first. So each of them have different values and different names. So let's try it out. So input checkbox. So the value is 1, right, as we have set in the HTML. Let's set it or unset it. So you saw that the first checkbox was set and we've unset it. Similarly, I can keep changing the names and I can keep doing this for each of the checkboxes. Let's see if nth works for this or not. So I do nth and I do 1, and let's suppose I do 0. So nth works for this one as well. And now let's suppose I want to set the first one as false, or I want to set the second one as false. And this is just something that this returns. Usually you wouldn't see it when you're typing your jQuery code, because I mean, you until unless you're storing the value, but it's just that this is a function call, this particular line over here, and this is the return. Now you don't need to care about it until unless you are going to do something with it. So usually when you're writing JavaScript or jQuery code, you wouldn't see this because you would just call it as an instruction rather than expecting a return value from it. Right. Just in case you have a hidden field in your form, then input colon hidden is the way to go. Pretty similar to text or password field. So I'm going to leave it up to you to try it out as part of the assignments on your own. But literally there is no difference, except of course the hidden part. Next is a select drop down. So basically a drop down button, and let's see how we can sort of play around with it. I'm going to clear this up. Let's look at the HTML. Okay, the ID is cars. So let's select it by the ID and see what the value is. Okay, so there is no value. Let's see what the notes tell us. So there is no value right now because we haven't selected a particular option. The value was already selected. So the ID here was cars. You see, we got the value. Let's see how we can set the value. So to set the value, we can just pass it something which is a value we want to set. So this did not work because essentially, if you look at this, right, the value is not S capital A. The value has to be exactly the same. So if I do this and now I do this, then it will be set, because otherwise it's not, it's case sensitive, so it's not able to match. So if I want to do an OD, this wouldn't work. But if I do this, this would work. So you need to really look at the value that you're trying to set, the option, the value attribute, and set the option tag. So just in case you wanted to get the selected index of the option that is chosen. So let's suppose you were making a form which has a drop down based on which you want to do certain things. So you want to get the index that has been selected. So let's again select, and then we type selected index. So it gives us the value as 3 because Audi is on number 3 here in terms of number 4, but then it's 0 indexed. So if we set it to this, then the value changes to 1. If we set it to 2, the value changes automatically in the drop box. So for setting the value, you use the assignment, and for getting the value, you use this. Now, of course, there's a slight difference in the way that these things are done based on the input type that you're dealing with. And that's just the nature of things, because selected index is an attribute over here, and you can't exactly set the value like an input box. So please do keep in mind in terms of what you're dealing with. .val will work in a number of places, but it might not work if you're dealing with a particular kind of input. Next is the submit button and the reset button. They can be used again. So input colon submit will select the submit button, and input colon reset will select the reset button. There are no essential values inside them, but then this is basically more of a selector mention here, that you can select the submit and the reset buttons as well, and then you can take further actions on it. What further actions we'll see as we go along. So next bit is form validation. So now once that you have the value of the form, you can apply any of the typical JavaScript checks for string equality or anything else that you might want to check. So over here, if you look at the example, it's a simple example where you want to check the name value is not empty. You want to check if the address value is not empty, and you want to check if the email value is not empty. In case it is empty, then we want to alert the user that, hey, you have left this particular field as blank, please do fill it up. Now, the second validation is for a checkbox, and the message is going to be just, so this is more of a demonstration that if the message is set, if the checkbox is selected, then a message will be set in the HTML, otherwise it will not be. But a similar thing, it's a more of a condition check rather than a validation, but kind of builds on the concepts that we just talked about. Regular expressions. Now these are very, very important, and you will find them across languages, not just in JavaScript, but also in languages like Python, Java, C++, Ruby, anything for that matter. And they are commonly regex as well, and they're very important. So what they are essentially, to boil down, is, so see, simple string matching is very easy, right? That if you can check for an empty string. But what if I asked you to determine if a particular value was an email or not? That becomes a little tough. So an immediate reply was that, hey, I will look for the @ symbol. But then there are exceptions. What if the user forgets to add .com? So what if the user as their email is instructor@edureka. So you need to check for the .com as well. But then there are so many domain names. So what about edureka.co and edureka.co.in or edureka.in? Should you not consider that as a valid email? So as you see, there are a lot of complications when it comes to doing a simple determination whether a given value is an email or not. And that is where regular expression comes to help. It basically helps you look for patterns inside a given string and determine if the pattern is there or not. So we as human beings recognize emails no matter what because we just sort of understand the pattern that it has. The computer doesn't know what emails really are in a way. So you need to tell it that, hey, this is the pattern that I expect the string to be in. Is the pattern there or not? Now, the way regexes are written, they're written with certain characters that are understood by the language which is implementing them. And what I mean by that is that every language gives you the functionality of a regex. And the symbols that can be used are pretty universal. For example, this cap, the first symbol, the start of string. So let's suppose you say that my given string should always start with the alphabet A. Not in the middle, not in the end. It has to start with A. The sentence has to start with A and checking for that. That is where the caret will help you. Let's suppose you want all the words which are ending with the letter M, and that is where dollar comes in. Next is the period symbol, which just matches any given character. Any character that you see on the keyboard. Any valid ASCII or UTF-8 value. Plus refers to one or more characters. So you might say that the name length has to be at least of 5 digits, or if you want to check, or if you want to say that, hey, this particular string should, or the name should at least be one or more letters. That's where the plus symbol will come in. Naturally, your strings might contain the dollar symbol in itself. So if you're looking at an amount, right, $400, $300, or something of that sort, how do you sort of tell regex that, hey, ignore the dollar symbol? You do that with a backward slash. Question mark stands for zero or more characters. So let me just show you a quick demonstration of some of these things rather than just talking about it. And there is a very helpful website to kind of learn this. I would recommend it to all of you to visit this website. It's regex101.com. So let's suppose this is where I will write a regular expression and this is where I will write a test string to see if it matches or not, and this is where we will get the match information. I'll select, as I said, that there are multiple languages, multiple flavors as they're putting it. I'm going to select JavaScript over here. So I'm going to say identify all strings starting with the capital A. So alpha, beta, gamma, apples, America, Australia. So do note that this is a single test string. This is not test string. So if I remove this, and it is only matching at the starting of the string. So it is viewing this entire thing as input, not just this one. So let's suppose I remove this, and there are no matches. Let's suppose I remove beta, no matches still because now the string starts with G. Now there's a match, A for apples. No match again because the string starts with a return because this is on the next line. Now there's a match again. Remove this. And then there's a match again. So this is the ending of the string. Now let's suppose the string has to end with a certain character where it has to end with C. So it can be anything but it has to end with C. So ABC matches and it can literally have anything in the middle, right? Like I'm just typing random gibberish over here. But as long as the end is in a C, I'm good. The moment I remove it, the match is gone. Even a small c won't work, the capital C, only the capital C will work. It can be anything. It can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, followed by the capital C. That's what this regex tells me. Now let's suppose I wanted a 3-letter word which starts with an A, has any character in the middle, and then it ends with a H. So
ABH will work, ABB won't work. So dot signifies any character. A4H will work, AHH will work, AH small h will work. So, but to go back, this is just a pattern description, okay? This is a pattern description that I'm doing, and these are the test strings. So, if you understand what the pattern description is, it looks a little funny, I understand that, but if you just sort of understand the meaning of the individual symbols, right, then how am I saying that this matches this particular pattern? Because this matches this particular pattern description is what I'm trying to say. But this wouldn't work because only one character. But if I add a plus in front of it, then it matches because plus was any number of characters, one or more characters. So I said that dot refers to what type of characters, plus refers to how many of them can occur. So a single dot by itself will just be one character. But a dot plus is me kind of writing infinite dots between A and H. Me saying that, hey, any number of characters between A and H will do, and the match will continue to happen as long as there is an H over here. As soon as this goes or this gets small, it's gone. So then the next is the escape character. Let's suppose I want to match $400 or I want to match anything which sort of ends with a dollar. I want to match a price. So I'm going to say that $400 matches. However, it is 504 INR or this was 400%, this wouldn't match. But $400 would match because this is ending with a dollar. Next thing here is 0 more characters. So let's suppose I had to say that A and then the character can be there or it can't be. So what this will do is that it will match AH as of the BH or ACH or AHH because the question mark is saying that hey, it might be 0 or more characters. It's different from plus which says 1 or more characters. The question mark is more open that way.
So after this, we have, so alphanumeric matches is the primary one that you need to look at, where I'm saying that, hey, if it's a square bracket, we see inside it, I'm saying that it should match any single character inside A or B or C. So it's more of an OR condition that the match has to, the string that you're matching for needs to contain either an A or a B or a C for it to be a valid string. Now this is anywhere in the string in terms of until unless you tell it where you want it. So if I want it to be at the beginning and I say, hey, any letters which are starting with A, B or C, any words, sorry. So this is valid. This is also valid. This is also valid, right? But this is not valid. Keep watching the match information over here based on my test string. Then if I do this, it's not valid. So starting with any of A or B or C. If you place a caret symbol in front of it, this is within the bracket, not outside it, then you're automatically telling the regex engine that, hey, it could start with anything apart from this. So it really depends on which way you're going, whether it's if it's a lot of characters that you want to include or exclude. Depending on that, you will make a choice. So if you are just saying that, hey, A, B, C, D should not be the first letters, then probably second option is better than, writing all the rest of the 22 alphabets as per the first option. So if you were to say that write the same thing in this way, you would end up writing all the 23 other characters of the English language. This one is pretty interesting. It says A hyphen Z. So characters in the range lowercase a to z, uppercase a to z, and numbers. So the other ones are a little advanced. What I would suggest is that you really try them out. And in terms of what will be used when, what I would suggest is that if you have already used regex, then I think you pretty much know the answer to that question. But if you haven't, it will depend on the situation that you're in. Okay, it will depend on the situation that you're in, and what really helps is practicing. So if you go on over here, and I'm sure you will be able to find some practice problems, or I think your assignments would have that. please do practice the same. Very important, that's the best way to learn regex. Rather than just memorizing a bunch of rules, just practice the rules and they will come to you naturally. So continuing with the sets, in case you want a short form for any of those, here are the short forms. So you remember we did this one, and so it's not exactly that, sorry, it contains the underscore character as well, but yeah, it's pretty close. In case you wanted sort of only numbers, then it's /d. If you wanted any non-digits, then it's /D. If you wanted only words, numbers, and underscore, then it's /W, which is kind of like alphanumeric if you look at it. This is alphanumeric. This is all non-alphanumeric, and these are for white spaces. This is for the space bar. So jQuery provides us with the regex matcher.
It returns true if it finds a match, otherwise it returns a false. So this can be intimidating to beginners, the regex given over here. But if you do a reg.test against the email, then you can return true, otherwise you can return a false. So please do take note that this is a fairly complicated regex. I encourage you to try and figure out what it means, but if you don't get it, it's okay. However, the thing to remember is that reg.test is available. It gives you a true or a false based on whether it was successful as a match or it was a failure as a match. And then of course you can use it in various scenarios to based on what kind of inputs you're getting, what is the business context, what is the business logic, what is it that your application does, or what kind of validations you want to build. Next is a very important concept called event handling in JavaScript. Okay, so let's begin. So the first thing is that JavaScript provides us with a .bind function. So in this particular example, what it is saying is that, hey, whenever h1 is clicked on, call this function that I'm describing over here. And let's just quickly have a short demo. So let me go to my file and let me mute all of this out so that we have a clear playing field. So I have an example already set up for you guys. So there is a p tag and it's a paragraph, and I wanted to display an alert every time it was clicked. So I went ahead and clicked on it, and whatever was in there was executed. So alert can be quite annoying, so let's just do a console.log. So you see this number indicates the number of time it was called. So instead of the annoying alert statements, this is a much better option to use console.log. Now, there are various kinds of events in JavaScript. Click is one of them, but usually somebody would not click on a paragraph, right? And you would hover over a paragraph. Wait, I'm sorry. The event was mouse enter. So this works on mouse entering, only in mouse entering. I can also make it work on mouse leaving. So entering or leaving is basically defined by, so if the mouse is going towards the element, then it's mouse entering the domain of this element. Nothing is going to happen if I stay over here, right? But if I leave, which I am leaving the domain, I'm leaving the area, then this happens. So let me kind of demonstrate it better by giving it a style of 0.1 pixel solid black, and let me give it a margin of 10 pixels. Sorry, I think I had to give it a padding. My bad. So the reason I'm giving it padding is so that it's like big and there is a good enough area. Do you notice what is happening as I'm entering and I'm leaving? Okay, let's do another thing. Let's separate these out. So we have mouse enter and we have mouse leave. Leaving your world, and this is entering your world. So that's what bind does. It ties in an event or a user interaction. So user interaction can be click, as I just showed earlier. It can be mouse entering or leaving. It can be key up, key press, key down. There is an entire list of the same. And these are events, and this is called as event handling. So handling basically means that something has occurred on the web page. Now, how do you as a developer write a response to that? And the response is really written in this function here. So this is what the event is going to be, and this is what the response is. Now, one question might be that how do I know what events are going to be there on the web page? Well, that is what you will describe as a product. That okay, on my web page, the user can enter, can use hover effects, the user can click on buttons, the user can do this or that. I mean, that really depends on you and the business logic of your application. And based on those interactions, you have to define your response. So in the sense that you might have used certain apps that
allow you to do several things, whether it is drag and drop items. Some are simpler that they just allow you to click on buttons. So it depends on really what you're building, and that is how the events sort of work, and in terms of your response to the events can work out. So another thing is, this keyword is basically assigned automatically inside the scope, and it refers to the original HTML. It refers to this, the JavaScript object on which the function was declared. So we will see this shortly. Let me just show you a demonstration. You see, click me is coming with entering your world, because I just call $this dot text. So it is picking up whatever is inside of the paragraph tag. Now, unbinding is a way to remove an event. So sometimes you may have a need to remove a certain event if it's no longer required. And I think it's very important from from a memory management perspective as well. And it's important that you remove the event just in case it's not required anymore and you feel that it can happen. The business logic, not recommended always, but you need to have a good use case for using unbind. So let's suppose after the first time this happens, I want to unbind mouse enter. So please note very carefully what I'm doing here. What I'm saying is that the first time it leaves the mouse leaves the P tag, then the mouse enter event should no longer be applicable. That's what I'm trying to tell my jQuery. Let's see how it responds. So now it only responds to leaving. It is not responding to entering. This executed once and now it's never executing. Let's try it again. Okay, exit, entry, nothing on entry. On exit, yes, but not an entry because we did an unbinding on mouse enter. So unbind universally removes any event handlers. So this one was just removing mouse enter, but if you want to remove all the event handlers, which is both this one and this one, on the set element, that you want to completely disable any sort of response to the interactions, this is what you need to do. Now nothing is working, both of them are gone, so it will execute once and that's it.
now there is also the live method. So using the live method, you can attach any event handler to your future elements which matches your original selector. Now this can be a little tricky to understand, but luckily for us, a bind, unbind, and live methods have been deprecated from jQuery version 1.7. Now, in case your project is still using 1.7, then it's a different case. But in case you're starting a new project, definitely, I think, use the more latest version of jQuery. So let's look at which version of jQuery is currently active. So right now we are on version 3. So if you're using 1.7, it's really, really old. And I strongly recommend that you figure out a migration path from 1.7 to something like 3. So 1.7 would have come out a couple of years ago, and strongly recommended that you do not use these methods as they have been deprecated. Now on pretty much like works like bind. There is not much difference in terms of how you define it and work with it, but I think internally jQuery would have made some changes. But yeah, on works in a very, very similar way. Now as I showed you with bind, you could add multiple events to the same handler. But one interesting example is in case you wanted to create different responses based on different actions. Instead of creating two different bindings like this, what you could do is that you could simply say that, hey, you can pass it an object and you can say that on mouse enter, I want to do this, and on mouse leave, I want to do this. So let me sort of open the color box. So just a simple HTML box described over here. So let me describe a span class message ID message color is white, font size is, let's set it to 16 pixel, and it will do nothing but simply it will go to, I'll pick up the message. Okay, I think, sorry, there's a spelling error here. It's mouse enter with a double E. Please take note of that. So it's changing the entire one. It's not just changing the last bit. It's just that it seems like that. Let me just remove it so that it's very clear that it's changing the entire string and not just the part which is different in case. So, I mean, it's not too different, but it's just cleaner this way. It's very, very cleaner this way if you kind of do it like this. So I would recommend, in fact, looking at this. And this is just like, if you look at the syntax, might look confusing with all the curly braces at once. But then it's just a JavaScript object which has three keys corresponding to the event names and having multiple handlers for the same. Next is the event object. Apart from the fact that a click or a mouse enter or a mouse leave has happened, there is another very important thing, which is the event object. Now, whenever the event happens, you might require additional information about the event. This is passed to you by the event object, which has several attributes. One of them is type. So let's suppose you had multiple events. So in the sense that if you look at this particular way of writing things, where I could have written it like this as well, right? Now, then you need to know which event has happened, and let's suppose you did not want to do what I did over here. You did not want to create multiple conditions, because what you wanted to do was that you wanted to do one thing different based on what the event has been. Just one thing. The rest of the steps had to remain same, let's suppose. So then you need the type, which gives us the button or key that was pressed, target gives us the originating element, and X and Y gives us where the mouse was when the event happened, where exactly the mouse was. And certain examples of working with event objects is that you can check if it happened on a particular place or at a particular position, and you can take a decision or you can write logic accordingly. So let's quickly see what we are getting as a result for this one. So right, mouse leave was the function that it captured, and the position is 0. 0 is more like in terms of DOM, where is the element, then the element in itself, and then the mouse position, 267, 355. So target is this, which is this particular thing, and mouse leave is the event dot type. Overall, if we do remove these and instead we just do this, we can end up with something like this. And if you see, it's a very rich sort of object with a lot of things inside it. Not that you need to know everything today, but I think certain things that are mentioned over here on the slide deck are definitely useful, such as event.type, event.which, and so on and so forth. So let's suppose you want to override the way a link works. Let's suppose clicking on a link, what you want to do is that you want to display the web page in an iframe on that page itself. Or based on a button click on a form, you want to add certain validations from your end. So you want to use the button tag, but then you don't want to for it to submit the form as it is. Maybe you want to make a different kind of request, or you want to do something else with it. So that's what prevent default does. It removes the regular behavior of the particular thing that you're trying to target. So let's try it out. Let's call it target link. Call it href is equal to https google.com. Let's call it target is equal to scope blank, and then let's call it as a. Let's call it target link, and we're going to bind the click event to it, and then we're going to say that, hey, so if I click on it, now nothing happens. It's not that the link is broken, the link is fine, Google is opening up. It's just that on this particular page I've changed the default behavior. So this can be quite powerful. I mean, imagine that you can take the A tags, or you can take the buttons, and you can use sort of override certain behaviors that are there by default. And this can really help you in creating really customized websites that are serving a particular kind of effect that you wanted to have based on your needs. So this was about event.prevent default. Now there is another one called stop propagation, which refers to something called as event bubbling. Now sometimes when an event happens, right, it might trigger events all the way up to the DOM. So if you look over here, we have used the star selector, right, which is going to be triggered on click. Let's suppose instead of the star we have a div element, right, and the div element has a click event, but subsequently all the children of the div also, or a child div has a click event, but then you don't want the parent div to catch that event because the event bubbles up. So that's where you will use something called as stop propagation. Now this is very useful if you're studying something like Angular, and this will really help you over there. So understanding event bubbling is very important. Now there is another function which is kind of like bind unbind. So you saw how I unbinded a particular event, right? Now what jQuery provides us with is on and off. But then if you think that it's a little tedious, right? It's a little cumbersome that once you will set the event and then you will turn it off in a separate line. You can use something called as one. What this does is that it runs the event only once, and the next time you click on it, then it doesn't run it. So if we come to this one and I say that, okay, I ran it once, load the page, that's it. Now no more run once. If it was on, then it would run multiple times. But the moment I change it to 1, then it runs only once. Now off does what unbinding did. Very simple. I'll just change it to 1. I'll come here and then I'll do $this dot off. Let's suppose I wanted to remove only mouse enter, right? I did not want to remove mouse leave. So what I'll do, I'll reload the page. Now it only runs when I come out of it, not when I go in. Let's run now, round, now. I can also pass in multiple values to this. So then both are disabled. Or if it's not, I want to remove all the events, then it's like this. Now this works in a similar way as unbind. And as the last line mentions, it's a best practice to ensure that you only have the event bindings that you need. So in case you don't need certain event bindings, it's a best practice to remove them, because in really complex applications, and I'm not talking about simple applications, I'm talking about really complex applications with a lot of events and a lot of listeners, it might be best for optimal performance to kind of remove certain events after they are no longer required. So in case you're removing a DOM element, maybe sort of a way to offload that DOM element or hide that DOM element would also be to remove the events alongside it. So let's suppose you're hiding certain buttons, but the events are still attached, right? And let's suppose you have 1,000 such buttons. So it would make sense to unbind those events to avoid any sort of unexpected outcomes. So please do keep the off in mind. Now, another thing is that you can trigger events on certain elements using the trigger function. Now, it can be used to mimic browser events such as clicking of an anchor tag. Now, this is very useful. Think about it. Let's suppose what I wanted to do was I I wanted the link to work, right? When I enter the color box, prevented the default behavior, right? So this particular thing happened where I wanted to mimic the browser behavior. So this doesn't actually open the link. It's not an actual click on the link, but it mimics the behavior. And I can observe certain things using this. Let's suppose we look at this example, and what it does is that it sets a function called foo on the p tag, and clicking the function will call that, will execute it, but the trigger is elsewhere. Instead of the mouse, it is elsewhere that the trigger is happening from. So this could also be on the basis of, let's suppose the user enters a certain input and you want to trigger certain actions, and it's not just like, I mean, without any user interaction. That's the main part here. Or you want things to happen in a certain way. That's where dot trigger will help you out. And finally, custom events. So the way custom events work is that you can create your own event name, and then you can trigger the same by using the trigger one. So these can be anything essentially. So let's suppose custom event, and what does it do is custom event called, and I want to call it straight away. So one question that you might have is, where will I use this? See, so it will be useful if the website is really interactive, where you have exhausted all the existing events, and let's suppose based on certain positions of the mouse, let's suppose based on the position of the mouse you want to trigger an event, and you can't call it any of the other events because it creates a conflict of some sort, and you want to call it your own custom event specific to your applications. That's when this will be useful. See, the custom event was called immediately as you reload the page because I'm just calling it here from outside. I'm just calling it here from outside. I can also call it here. So another thing I could do is that I could just click on the link, but you will notice that the custom event was called. The web page opened, but the custom event was also called. So let's suppose you had to track the number of link clicks. This would be a very easy way to do that, right? So you could, let's suppose, track links, and you could call it over here. Link was triggered and the custom event was called. This one is an example. I sort of suggest that you try it out and see how this works. We have already done remove class or add class, so this would be a really nice assignment for you. So do try it out and see how you can sort of use it. But in terms of custom events, why they would be used, I think it's again about customization of your application to an extent where it is making sense because it is at a scale. So this will usually be used when you are at a pretty decent scale in terms of the number of lines of code that you have written, or the amount of, like, the breadth of your application that you have developed. So prior to AJAX, so AJAX basically asynchronous JavaScript used to sort of exchange data on the internet. Now prior to AJAX, everything was done on the server side. So whenever you would click on a button, it would reload the entire page. But think about it. Today when you like something on Facebook, or you comment, or the Facebook news feed gets more data, do you need to reload the page every time? No, right? That's because AJAX is the magic behind it, which can make calls to a server. And by server, I mean through a URL. So it will call a URL, execute a URL, and either get some data or send some data to a web server. The benefits are that the user sees, so this entire process is much faster than loading the entire website again and again. So loading the entire website again would mean
loading the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files again. It's much faster because you're just getting the data that you need and you're updating using JavaScript. So you're saving on a lot of time. And then all major browsers started supporting something called as an XHR, XML HTTP request from 2003. And that kind of solved this issue because now if all major browsers are supporting it, then it became very popular and now you see it almost everywhere. When you take almost any action from sending a chat message to, let's suppose, liking something or subscribing to your favorite YouTube channel, it's all being done via AJAX. So whenever you see the page not loading, but some sort of data being exchanged on the internet, it's AJAX which is helping you out. So as the first line says, it can be transferred between the browser and the server, that is the client and the server, without having to reload the web page. Now, how is the data exchanged? This happens by a URL. So essentially all URLs, as we know, are exchanging or carrying some data as a response. So when you go to facebook.com or google.com, the response is an HTML web page, right? And when you, let's suppose you have a link to an image on the web, it's a URL, but then it's responding with image data type. So similarly, you can have any sort of data at the end of a URL and you can load that data, or you can get the data, or you can send some data to a particular URL for a particular action. And this happens through AJAX in JavaScript, through XML HTTP request API in JavaScript. And AJAX is something which is very popular that way. Now, the requests are asynchronous, which means the rest of your code continues to execute while the request is being processed and the response is received in XML format. Now, this was when it was back in 2003, but now, of course, as you will see, you can sort of specify any type of format that you need. And entire technology piece, this entire process is referred to as asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Now, XML is a bit dated because today XMLs are still used, but not in any new and upcoming systems in terms of for exchanging data. So XML is something which was very popular back in the day, but then because it is so bulky, largely gone out of fashion. But the main things to remember here is that the rest of your code continues to execute while the request is being processed. Now, this is a very powerful idea, which means that you can have multiple AJAX calls at the same time. So when your Facebook page loads, right, your newsfeed is being loaded, your friend list from the chats is being loaded, any trending stories are being loaded, ticker is being loaded, multiple individual requests happen at the same time while the page loads. And this makes the entire process seem really quick because at least you can start seeing some of the content, some of the data while the rest of it loads. So you might have observed that sometimes, the ticker hasn't loaded or the friend list on chat hasn't loaded, but everything else has loaded. You can like, comment, and the other one is still loading. And this happens because they are asynchronous. They don't happen in a serial fashion. They happen in a parallel fashion. Now, you might be wondering if this is somewhere similar to the concept of threading that you might have seen in something like Java or any of the other languages which support threading. So it's not threading. It's something that the browser enables with the use of something called as an event loop. However, it is really a topic which should be tackled by much advanced JavaScripters. That is, what is an event loop and how does it work? However, it is a very popular interview question that if JavaScript is a single threaded synchronous language, how is it that you have something called as AJAX, which is asynchronous, which is parallel to everything else? Now understand that JavaScript in itself hasn't changed here. It's not that the rules of JavaScript have changed for this particular thing. It is still continues to be a single threaded synchronous language. However, browsers enable this asynchronous behavior. It is based on the browser. So if you notice, the last slide mentioned something like in 2003 they started supporting it, right? So browsers had existed even before that. There was Netscape, there was Mozilla as well, I think. But then browsers support for this started coming from 2003 and then it became popular. So it is not JavaScript which is sort of supporting it. The XML HTTP request API is a browser API, meaning that, so if that sort of sentence is not clear to you, it means that the browser enables the AJAX requests. Yes, you do it through JavaScript, but then it is certain fundamental things. There is a foundation, okay? There is a foundation that the browser is providing for these to be even possible. Now, naturally, when we talk about the browser enabling it, right? Therein we face the same problem that we talked about in the first class itself, that different browsers are like different painters or different people, and they implement the functionality in their own way. So everyone has a different XML HTTP request API. That's where jQuery comes in such a beautiful way that it provides you with a single set of methods which take care of requests across browsers, as you will see as you go along. But this is one of the most, again, makes jQuery so accepted as a library that it helps you manage JavaScript related cross browser dependencies. And apart from $.ajax being a method, there are certain other methods available like $.get, $.script, $.getJSON, $.post, which are also available to you. Now, there are two more most common methods for sending a request to a server. One of them is get. The get method is used for getting any data from the server. So this may be a search result that you're trying to get. This may be a list of friends. This may be a list of notifications. This may be a list of stories. This may be a list of videos on YouTube. This may be a list of channels on YouTube. This may be a list of restaurants. So anything that you're trying to get, typically a search query, any information that you're trying to access, an article that you're trying to read on a blog, a set of images or GIFs. Post request is when you're sending any data to a server and asking for it to be updated or created. So this is creating a sign up form. This is somewhere around updating your profile on Facebook. This is somewhere around creating a post on Facebook. This is around creating a comment. So get is reading and post is basically creation or updation as required. Now, when it comes to $.ajax, jQuery's AJAX method, there are certain options in terms of what kind of data types can you exchange. So you can start with something as simple as text. You can just simply transfer strings. You can also transfer HTML. Imagine a web page which can just simply load a part of it, a part of the HTML from the server. Seems a little odd maybe, but suppose for a second that the HTML was coming from the server. There was some updation, there was some request based on which the response is an HTML block. You can also pass in the script as a data type to add more scripts to a particular web page. Then there is of course JSON, the very popular JSON format, which looks like an object in JavaScript that can be used. Then there is JSONP. So JSONP is basically used when you're trying to load data from another domain. So we'll come to this and then it'll be more clear. And XML basically follows the XML schema, which transfers data in any custom XML format. But please notice that these are pretty much exhaustive in terms of they allow you to exchange any kind of data, almost any kind of data, by using the AJAX functionality. Talking about JSONP, so there is something called as the same origin policy. So same origin policy says that if Facebook.com is making a AJAX request, it should be making the request to Facebook.com server in itself. Like the server's domain name, the protocol HTTP or HTTPS or FTP or something else, the port and the domain name cannot be different. So it doesn't mean the web page needs to be different, but it means that the person who sent that HTML, CSS, JavaScript file is the same person we are communicating with. This is a security practice and most browsers execute it very strongly. Now, what if you wanted to get data from another service provider? Let's suppose you wanted to get data from IMDb for your website, but your website is not imdb.com, it is abc or edureka.com. How would you do that? So for this, there exists something called as the JSONP that you can make AJAX requests from different domains. So in the case of JSONP, the provider of the service will respond with something, with a script that can be loaded into the page using a script tag. And that script will include the data you requested, wrapped in a callback function you provide. So it just basically circumvents that limitation by kind of providing you a script which contains the data. But of course, this is not handwritten. This is more or less generated on the fly. So that the script, it will have a certain string format, that server scripting language, PHP or Python or whatever it is, must be generating on the fly. And JSONP is primarily used when you want to make requests which are cross-browser requests. Now, there are various methods available in jQuery to make AJAX requests, but however, the AJAX method is mostly preferred, and it is considered to be a good practice, and it is a powerful method with a lot of features, with a lot of options available to create AJAX requests. What it takes is a configurable object. So configurable object meaning the settings or the options that I just talked about, which you can set and use to complete requests using AJAX. Now we'll go ahead and explore. So you can of course go and explore all the various options. So let me just open it up for you so that you can have a first-hand view. So we're going to search for jQuery, or we can search for AJAX, jQuery. So as you will notice over here, these are the various kind of options available. So yeah, there is a lot of them. Not that you need to reuse everything to make your first or few initial AJAX requests, but it's good to know that there are a lot of options available, because naturally, I mean, it allows you to do something in a better way or something that you thought that you could not do. But once you see that option is available, you can use that particular feature of the library and really make something interesting out of it. So moving on, some of the options available. One of them is async. So async by default is true. So this is the asynchronous. So you can make synchronous AJAX requests as well. Now this can be a tricky question in an interview where the interviewer asks you, hey, can you make a synchronous JavaScript AJAX request? Yes, it is possible, but it will block the execution of code until other response is received. What does cache do? So cache is basically, it caches the response of your AJAX request, and if it sees that you're making another request of the same kind, it will not make this request again. Instead, it will handle it internally. Complete is a callback function that you run when the request is complete, regardless of whether it was a success or a failure. Whether the request that you made, let's suppose the URL did not exist, or the URL returned a error 500. So it's a 404 or a 500 or something else which is an error code. Or the request is complete, that it returns success 200. However, complete says that no matter what the outcome is, once the jQuery call is finished, this is what you should do. So one typical use case could be, let's suppose you want to show a loader. You want to show a simple loader bar, that when the AJAX request starts, you want to start showing this loader bar. Once the request is complete, you want to remove the loader bar, right? Naturally, which doesn't depend on the success or the failure of your function. It just depends on whether the request is complete or not. If it's an error request, fine, but still remove the loader. The next is data. So any data that you're sending, whether it's with the GET request to specify the kind of query that you're searching for, or whether it's with the POST request containing the data that you want to submit to the database. That's what will come in this parameter. And again, the value has to be an object typically. Typically it is an object, but of course it can vary based on the URL configuration and everything on the server side. But then one of the better practices is to kind of talk in JSON itself. So if it's a object, it's a JavaScript object, then AJAX will basically send it across to the server like a JSON. So then it's basically a JSON API that we are talking to. Next is data type, which specifies the kind of data that you expect from the server. Next, you have something called as an error. Now, this is the callback function when the request runs into an error. Next is JSON B. This specifies a callback name to send in a query string when making a JSON request. And the default is just callback. Success. This is the function which is called when once the request is complete and everything has been completed, the status code of 200 has been returned, and now you have the data that you needed. Next is timeout. It specifies the time in milliseconds to wait and consider the request as a failure. So if you specify that, hey, just wait for 1000 milliseconds, which is like 1 second. But after that, if the response is not returned, you should consider that request as a failure. Let's suppose that is the kind of application you're building. So timeout helps with that. Type is the kind of verb that you're using on HTTP, whether it's get or a post, or it's a put or a delete. Default is get. Now URL is, this is the request URL, of course. So nothing happens without this. It is a mandatory option. Everything else is mandatory configuration, a key. Everything else is optional. So let's do a quick example, okay? Let's do a quick example. I have here an AJAX function. In fact, let me change this. Right.
So you see, this is like a JavaScript object. This is a JavaScript object, and I'm just configuring it to various parameters. Complete with error, with success and data. And then we can also mention the type as get. Let's be explicit about it. Then mention the data type. So I'm going to make a JSON request for this demonstration. What other parameters can we use? Let's use the timeout as well. Let's set it to 2500. And okay, we are good. So I'm going to uncomment this. Now for the URL, what I'm going to do, and I think you guys can try this out as well. Whenever I have to sort of try out something and I need like a JSON URL, this is where I go. So you can just create a JSON for yourself over here. So let's do creation. We have gotten a access URL over here. We can also view the JSON. It's a simple JSON, nothing much. And we can pass the URL over here. Let's take this page for a spin. Okay, so the button is appearing over here. So in case you are not familiar, there's something called as a network tab. So once you open the debugger, right, there is a network tab. It's very, very useful for, especially for AJAX requests. It has something called as an XHR. This is where you can see all the AJAX requests that your web page will ever make. And this is not just for yourself. This is not just for your website. This is for any website that you go. You can go to youtube.com, and once you open the network tab and you look at XHR, you will see all the requests that they are making. Let's click on the button. So automatically we see a request was made, right? We see a request was made and we got a response, same as this, except that we called it using jQuery. Let's look at the console. Complete with success and data, and then complete has been called over there. Now let's kind of change the URL a little bit so the request will fail. So it was ending with a 7, I removed the 7. Now let's reload the page and click me. Now this fails, but it completes with error. So why is this important? This is important so that you can handle the situation. So I can sort of, let's push. So an error over here. Looks like something went wrong. Let's do this. Looks like something went wrong. Please try again later. So they of course have a similar request. Of course, they are getting the data and then they are sort of setting it in HTML. I leave it up to you to try it out. Reach out to support if you have an issue, but it's pretty much it. So I showed an alert statement status that they have shown something in the HTML, and yeah, this should suffice. Let's look at some of the other AJAX methods available. So one of them is $get. So in fact, I think we can use $get for this in itself. So we'll do a $get over here, JSON, and the URL needs to be, it can be the same URL. And it has this function which is basically on request completed. And this empty object is basically any of the data that we want to send. But in this case, there are no query parameters, so we can just get by without it. And this over here is the server response. So let's try out $get. What I will do is that I will mute out the original AJAX request, and then we can try this out. Seems like I made a syntax error. Let me see. It says line 54. So as you saw, We can just simply make the request like this. Let me remove this, and this is now going to execute $.get, and this worked out perfectly fine for us. And now we have, and in the console, the request completed, variable has been printed, and the same is available to us. I think the mistake that I was making was the key. So this does not take an object, right? And this one will work now. So I was just trying to pass it when it doesn't take a key and it just takes the parameter. That's a mistake. Just in case, please remember, it doesn't take object like AJAX does. It just takes the values. In case you already know that it's going to be a JSON request, you can try something called as get JSON. You can simply pass in the URL. Next, what you need to do, if you have a look, you can pass the data object and you can pass the response. The response here is simple. It's going to be a function, and we're going to say console.log, and we're going to reload it. Okay, I think I made a spelling mistake. Yeah, it's get JSON. It's all capital, and we see it on the console. That's using get JSON, and we can see the request in the tab as well. In case you missed it, let me just show it to you again. Now we're calling it using getJSON. Similarly, there is a post method. You slide with the data values, you pass to the function, and you specify the response that you're expecting. Now there is something very interesting called as $.load. This fetches an entire HTML from a URL. And let me just quickly show you what to do with it. So I have a container div here, and I have this test.html, which just contains this h2 tag. So it could contain any HTML, but it just contains this. Now what I will do here is that I will try to load the test.html. I will try to load the test.html and into the container. So let's see how we can do that. We do this and voila. Now why this is so useful is that it allows you to sort of have components, have different, you reuse different pages, different sections of your HTML in multiple places. So that's why this is very, very popular and interesting as an idea, that you can make smaller versions of your HTML file with reusable components and use them in multiple places by tying it together by using something called as .load. Moving on. So serialization and serial array. So what serialize does is it serializes a form's data into a query string, and the input element must have a name attribute to get serialized. So you cannot, if the input type does not have that the name attribute, then it can't get serialized. But if it does, then this is a way to serialize it. This is especially useful if you're submitting a post request to a server where you want the key value pairs, or you want to tell the server that hey, this data is this particular value, right? Otherwise, how would server know that if it is the first name, or it is the full name, or it is the last name, or if it is the middle name? Let's suppose you were making an application which took the name of the users, so first name, last name need to be proper, and it needs to store them accordingly so that they're used accordingly everywhere. So that's why serialize can be very helpful. Serialized array is similar to serialize, but it produces an array of objects instead of a string. So serialize produces a string, but serialized array produces an array of objects, which can be more useful depending on how the server side is configured. So what I've done for these is that I have the jQuery website in itself has a very, very good demo of this. So I did, it would be better to demonstrate the same from there. Right, so if we come here, what we have is we have a form which has a multiple input. So let's select one input, let's not select any checkbox, and let's select both the radio buttons. So if you see, single is equal to single 2, multiple is equal to multiple 2. I can also select this one. So multiple is equal to multiple, and multiple is equal to multiple 2, and radio is equal to radio 2. I can also select the other radio button, which will make it radio 1. I can select check 1, I can select check 2. So this is really the output string. The way it is happening is that this is the input form. This is the form over here, right? Just have a look at it. Based on the changes, so $select, based on any of the changes in any of the input boxes, show values is being called. So if I change any of these input boxes, whether it's the drop down or the multi-select or the checkbox or the radio buttons, it will call this method called show values. What show values does is It takes the form object, it takes the DOM, selects the entire thing, and just calls serialize on it. That's it. That's it. And it gets the string. It gets the string and it appends it to this results that we so that we will be able to see here. So as simple as that. So instead of taking out values one by one, one by one, one by one, or selecting every input, now you have a very cool method which will automatically get the values for you in a string by just selecting the form option and calling serialize method on it. Let's have a look at serialize array. And serialized array, the example is pretty much similar. However, the execution in terms of it's a bit neater, I would say, because it maintains an array list. And I mean, as compared to string, arrays tend to be more easily manipulable. So we have used the jQuery.each function. We have passed in the fields, which is basically the array. So look at this line 49, and we iterate over it, and it just displayed the results over here in the results. So these are pretty useful if you're submitting data to a server using the post request. Now coming to jQuery utilities. So $.each is something that we have already studied in the past. It just basically takes an array of values and iterates over them one by one, one by one, one by one. So we can just take an object or an array and pass in the keys and values and let's suppose sum the entire thing. So it's a very easy and convenient method, and I would recommend using it over the conventional for loops. It just makes your code look a little more neater and organized as compared to writing a for loop. Of course, I mean the thing inside it wouldn't change much, but then it's just much neater and it's much more robust in my experience with large applications than using something as a for loop almost everywhere. And of course, I mean, in jQuery, you can select an entire set of elements and then do something on them. So in case you wanted to, I think you could just like get the links, the value of the links inside each of the, get the entire A tag with this snippet of code. It will iterate over all the li elements, get the snippet of the A tag, and just console.log it. Next is map. Now, map is very useful. Let's suppose you wanted to take an array and you wanted to create another array out of it which just contains the capitalized words. So you want to take a list of names. You did not want to change the original one, but you wanted to create a new one which just had some sort of modification or alteration to it. That is where $.map comes in. So if you notice over here, it takes the names Molly and Libby, it iterates over the names, and per name it does a split on the space, and in case it contains any, it will just basically split them and present you with this array called exploded girls. Kind of funny, but yeah, that's what $.map does. And again, one of the more robust ways of dealing with things. $.trim is simply a trimming function. So I could show you a small quick demonstration over here. So we take dollar space. So it removes the initial and the ending space, not the space in the middle, but it removes the space in the starting and the ending. It's just something that helps in, it's a utility function. So you might need it to kind of trim the user input before sending it to the server, or you might need to just, clean up data that you're getting from the server because it's corrupted or not corrupted, but it's not kept neatly. So that's where $.trim will help you out. Next is in array. Check if a particular element is in the array or not. Now, of course, there are other methods to do it in JavaScript as well, but then this is just a very utility based function available in jQuery. So we can call an array and we can say 4 and then we can say ARR and it will return -1 if it's not there. If it is there, then it will return the index. So it's basically returning the index. Okay, so the condition is really so to see whether something is an array or not. If you have the result of this is greater than -1, then it is true. If it is not -1, let's suppose you're checking if 100 is in the array, then it's false. Now then there are some other utility functions. One of them is called isFunction. So you can check if a certain thing is a function or not. Quite interesting, right? So let's try it out in a fun way. So let's call isFunction on $.each, and it's true. Is
dollar an array a function? Yes, it is. Is jQuery, it is a function. We also have the window object. Is that a function? No, it's not a function. It's an object. If we display something like this, and then we call $is function on A, it's false. It's just a convenient method of checking something if of the type that a something is. Then next we have something called as a is plain object. So what I described as just now var a, we can also try it on the window function is plain object. So it's not a plain object. Let's try on a. So a is a plain object. Window is a non-plain object, but a is a plain object over here in this case. Let's try that out on dollar. So dollar is not a plain object. jQuery is not a plain object. Let's see if $.ajax. So $.ajax is not a plain object, but is $.ajax a function? Yes, it is. So $.ajax is a function. Similarly, you have something for checking if something is an array or not. Would work in a very similar way. So the next topic that we have to tackle is something called as a deferred object or deferred concept in JavaScript or in jQuery. However, before I go over here, let me introduce you to a problem statement. Okay, so let me unmute this. Let's say declared, and over here what we're going to do is we're going to take the user details and we're going to give it the value of the result. So we are going to fetch the details from the web, and then we are going to right now what I've done is that I have called the AJAX, and after the AJAX is called, just after the AJAX statement, I've also placed console.log user details. Now think for a second, what do you expect it to do? Initially user details doesn't have any value. Then I made an AJAX call, and then I'm trying to print it on the console, the details. What do you expect? And just hold your answer with you, whether you expect it to print the details or whether you expect it not to print the details. And then assuming that you have decided what it will do, let's see what it will actually do. Let me reload the page, clear up all of this. So if you look at this line 52, it says this is undefined. This is undefined, but once we look at 41, this says that it is successful. So what happened? Because right, we call the AJAX statement and this seems to be have been successful. I mean, the network tab states that it is successful. We have the data, but then seems like we went wrong with something. So here is the thing. Remember, it's asynchronous. So the way it will work is that JavaScript will call this and then move on to the next line. JavaScript will call this and move on to the next line. Then when the response comes back from the server, that is when JavaScript will execute this function. So it's asynchronous. This happens, this entire thing gets executed after the request has been completed successfully. So you will always see a console.log as user details as undefined over here. This is not like a mistake as such, but this is basically not understanding the concept of AJAX well. Now, a lot of times when you're dealing with complex applications, or not even so complex applications, but anything which is more than, at an industry level, you are going to deal with these situations where responses will determine. So a particular AJAX call might happen, and the response of that AJAX call, you want to do certain other things. So how do you manage all of these things? Because if you are waiting for that request to resolve, so let's suppose what I was supposed to do is that I was supposed to get a list of movies from IMDb via API call. And after I got the list of movies from IMDb via an API call, I was supposed to pick the movie which is more than 2 hours long, because the list of movies also has the duration of each movie. After I find that movie, then I need to make another API call for the list of actors. Then I have to make another API call for the list of actors. Then, if the list of actors has Tom Hanks in it, or has any particular actor with the letter T as the first name, forget Tom Hanks, letter T as the first name. For those actors, I needed to get details in individual API calls. So these are our URL calls, right? So the first is for the list of movies. Then based on some condition, we are asking for the actors in that particular movie. And then on another condition, which may be just the names of the actors or the name lengths of the actors. So basically we want to get all movies which have all actors whose first name starts with the letter T and have starred in movies which are more than 2 hours long. I know it's not a imaginable scenario, but for the sake of understanding, we can assume that this is something that we want to do. And trust me, in business logic, in case you're an experienced developer, you would have seen more complex cases than this. But if you are an upcoming developer, this is not going to be surprising to you once you have been working in the industry for 3, 4, or 5 years. So, how do you deal with this? Of course, one answer is, let's suppose I was supposed to do something with the result. So, let's suppose if I had some conditions over here and I had to make another AJAX call. So, I could simply do this dollar AJAX, right? I could write another AJAX call, and then within that I could write another one called as success, and I could write another one, and then it goes on and on and on. So one naive way of thinking about it is, or basic way of thinking about it is that, hey, there's an AJAX call. Okay, when it is successful, I'll make another one. Then I'll make another one. I'll make another one. But then you need to really at some point ask yourself, hey, where does this end? Because this is going to be very, very difficult to debug. Let's start with that. This is going to be massively difficult to debug. Find the errors in this. If even one AJAX call is going wrong, you're going to go through so much. The second thing is, this kind of situation actually has a name in JavaScript. It's called callback hell. So in no lesser terms, balmy and toned down terms, it's called as callback hell. And it is hell, in fact, if you have to debug something which is a lot of complex business logic and built like this. So people in the JavaScript community saw this as a potential problem because the situations with the upcoming complex applications that were coming up every day, this was just like bound to happen. I mean, you see so rich applications on the web or the internet today. This was bound to happen. Now, they came up with something called as a deferred object. So it typically starts in a pending state. Now we can identify with that, right? $.ajax starts in a pending state where output is not defined yet. We don't know if it is a success or a failure. So in the sense that when I told you that, hey, I've done a console.log over here, the AJAX call had been fired, but we don't know if it was completed. So it's in a pending state. The request is being made. We don't know how the server is going to respond yet. And the deferred object has basically two important methods. One of them is called as a resolve or a reject. In jQuery, AJAX method will call resolve on the deferred object and it returns when request is successful. And it will call reject when request is a failure. And both resolve and reject can be manually executed on any manually created deferred object. So the way you need to think about this is that internally inside this AJAX function, so let's suppose for a second there is something called as function AJAX in jQuery, right? Written exactly like this, which takes something called as an options. Now, what they would have done is, this is the deferred object, right? Sorry, I missed the capital D. So this is a pseudo code for how AJAX function might look inside of jQuery code base. Now, this is something that they would have done. Then they would have called as something make the request, etc. Now, once the request is complete, what they would have done is, if it is resolve, options.success would have been called like this. And if it is a reject scenario, error would have been called like this. Now you see how this is sort of internally working, that you specify what is to be done, but when it comes to actually making that happen, this is how it would have happened internally, where it's a deferred decision. They don't know yet. Now, when the response is there, they would either resolve that initial request or they would reject it. And when they're resolving it or rejecting it, they're going to call so this is an object, right? This is the options method, the options one which is coming in, the options parameter. And it has the success method defined on it, or it has the error method defined on it. And it's basically telling it that, hey, when the resolution happens, you need to call the options.success method. If the rejection happens, then it calls the options.error method. Deferred object also has other callback functions which are called as done, fail, or always. And it also allows you to listen multiple listeners to AJAX events without manually calling chaining callbacks. So chaining callbacks is something that I described earlier to you. It's very useful in that way, where it allows you to have multiple listeners to AJAX events and respond to scenarios in different ways based on what you're getting. Now, in jQuery, you also have something called as a promise, and it is based on the deferred object. So it is derived from the deferred object, but it is not the deferred object. Okay, it is a subset of it. One way to look at it is that it is a read-only deferred object. You have the methods to attach callbacks, but it does not have the methods to resolve or reject it. So one way to look at it is that deferred is the producer. It is what actually does the work. So it is what would actually make that AJAX call, right? Wherever the deferred is defined. But it would return a promise. So that function would return a promise in the sense that this would probably return something called as request.promise. Now promise is the consumer. So promise is what decides what to do when the function is returned. So let's take an example. Let's suppose you need notes for a particular exam from a friend. So you call the friend up and you say, hey, can you give me the note? The friend says, hey, I make a promise. I will get you the notes. So now you have the promise. It's not that the friend has the promise. The friend has made the promise. So this is the friend making the promise. Okay? Now, whether the promise succeeds or it fails, the reaction will be yours. But there is nothing that you can do to make that request of notes from the friend succeed or fail. I mean, of course, you can give them incentives like I'll give you a treat if you get me the notes, but that's real world. But over here, what we're talking about is that in an ideal world scenario, let's suppose a friend has to get the notes Xeroxed to give them to you, or he has to get them from somebody else, or he has to find them. So the actual work is done by the friend. Now, if you get the notes, if it resolves, then your response might be to read the note. If it's rejected, your response might be to call somebody else. But the friend, when it receives a request, it defers it. Defers it basically in the sense that he doesn't have the notes immediately. You just called him up out of the blue, and their person doesn't have the notes immediately, and he says, okay, I will get them for you. So this is not a scenario of, hey, can you give me the notes? And they hand you over the notes. It's not that scenario. The scenario is, hey, I will give it to you. I promise I will give it to you. Or it, maybe not explicitly they say that, but they mean it, right? It's a promise. Hey, I will give you the notes. And they say that they will give you the notes. That's a deferred situation. It's deferred. Until and unless they come back to you, it's deferred. So that is the big significant difference. And promises are useful in terms of they're limited in terms of what they can do. So in that way, you are clear. So as is in terms of what is your response. So in jQuery $AJAX, the AJAX method returns a promise. It has three main methods: done, fail, and always. So what I can do is that for this one, I can call done. I can say, okay, let's do a console.log of user details. Let's try this out. And it worked. It worked on line 69. Now, you may be asking, hey, but I could have done the same thing over here. That's just because I'm doing a console.log. But remember the original example of callback hell? Now, this is a good place to kind of call another AJAX function. This is a better place to call an AJAX function. That when this is done, then you kind of do this. Then you call the next AJAX call. There is also fail, and then there is also always. As is clear fail, this is the default callback for handling rejected requests, and always is called always no matter what. So This is a simple example, pretty much similar to what I have been showing you. So you call a function, the AJAX response, and then you can sort of individually go out and set these. This is much cleaner to read. I mean, of course, I was attaching it directly over here, but I could have also done this. Okay, so now this is a request, and I could have done this. So don't take this lightly though, in case you're thinking, oh, this is just about readability, but readability matters quite a bit. Imagine working on a code base of 10, 15, 20,000 lines of code. It will spiral out of control really quickly. It will spiral out of control before you can realize it. So that way, it is not that you can't survive without something like deferred or promise as a concept. You can, and I've seen people do it. However, much better to kind of learn these things and do the best. Then there is another concept. Let's suppose I've been making this AJAX call again and again and again, right? I'm making an internet call. So there is a concept of caching where you want to save the result, of the outcome. Now, what you want to do is that a very simple cache technique here is that you have made a request and you've saved the promise as a value in a object. So forget everything else. What you have simply done is that if you're making the request for the first time, if the ID of the request, in the sense that let's suppose I am loading songs by IDs, which are 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm loading 5 songs, and the song 1 hasn't been loaded yet. So for the first time, this condition will be true. So I want to store the promise. I'm just storing the promise. I'm not storing any results. I'm just storing the promise of this outcome. Now, of course, the promise will either resolve or reject. Then what I'm doing is that I'm calling done callback on it. Now, when it runs for the first time, when the promise is not there, this is not very interesting. But when it calls the load song for the second time, this block will not be called. The if block will not be true anymore. It will not go inside because the promise, the key already exists inside the cache object. And then I need to call dot done on it. So what will happen is that the request will not be called again. The request will not be called again. Instead, just the what is to be done once the request has been completed will be called. So it's kind of like this. Had you asked a friend for notes of 10 chapters, right? And those are 10 promises that he made to you. You keep storing the notes as he keeps delivering the promises. Now, if you want to read the notes, right, which is the callback here. So the callback function here is what you need to do once the notes are found for a particular chapter. Now, every time you don't need to make a call to your friend that, hey, I need the notes. You can just rely on what has been given to you. So cache is nothing but a storage, right? So it's like that you have got the notes and now you have stored them. So instead of asking the friend, so this is a situation, this block is a situation where you found the notes of chapter 8 missing. So you called him up and he made a promise to you and you sort of noted it down somewhere. Okay, chapter 8 notes, friend has to give to me. Now, once the promise is, they suppose, fulfilled successfully, then you can read the notes. Until then, you cannot read the notes. However, once that promise has been delivered successfully, you can read the notes multiple times. So you will get the notes once, but you will read it multiple times. That is what the callback is. So let's suppose a callback here is play the song or load the song or whatever, right? Or set it up, like show the details of the song. So whenever cache id.done callback is called, it is not that it's going to call for that data again and again and again. It's just going to call the callback with the original promise that, hey, this was the promise, this was the data that was fetched, and this is what you need to do with it. Now, another thing here is dot when function. And again, this directly addresses the callback here that I was just showing to you. As you can see that this is like a call inside a call inside a call. Let's suppose you have to load the songs in a sequence, 1, 2, 3. You have something called as a deferred chaining function where what you can do is that when the songs have loaded, so this is the way you should read this is more like dollar dot deferred dot when. Let's suppose the dollar dot post. I'm not going to write all the details here. Let's suppose it is for song and it's for ID 1. So I can pass n number of such requests, and once all of them are served, then I'm saying dot then, let's suppose So songs is what I want to do. So I want to load all the three songs, and that's where .when will happen, help us out in terms of all the requests being served. And of course, so they have used it on the Flickr API. So they have created a deferred object, they've made a request, they have gotten the data, and then they're resolving the promise, giving back the response data. And then we have the $.when on this. So .when is being called on TFD. So when fetch tweets is done, then you can set it up. So you're avoiding the callback hell here by using .when. Thank you so much for joining in. Have a good day.
All right. So thank you for the great session, Varun. I hope all of you found it informative. If you have any further queries related to this session, please comment in the comment section below and we'll try to reply to you as soon as it's possible. Until then, that's all from our side today. Thank you and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!